Arthur was once a tyrant, a ruthless king who ruled the world with an iron fist. On his path to the throne, he slaughtered his enemies without mercy, burned cities to the ground, and committed countless atrocities, all for the sake of power. But one day, he began to think about what he had done. Memories flooded his mind, guilt crushed his heart, and remorse began to eat away at him from within. Suddenly, a sharp pain struck his chest. His heart stopped. He collapsed and fell into darkness. In that endless void, a calm yet majestic voice spoke to him. "I shall grant you a second chance, but this time, seek the light." Moments later, Arthur opened his eyes slowly. Before him stood a man and a woman, looking down at him with warmth and affection. The man said his name was Reynold, and this was his wife, Alice, his mother. They didn't expect him to understand anything. He was just a newborn child, but joy overflowed from their faces. Arthur realized that these two were truly his parents, and that he had just been reborn. It was hard for him to believe that he had become a baby once again, yet he couldn't deny the comforting warmth that surrounded him. For the first time, he felt a strange, deep happiness. But along with that happiness came a new kind of suffering. His small, weak body that restrained him, his tongue unable to speak, his utter lack of control over himself. He would cry and soil his clothes without realizing it. Arthur, once a king who commanded armies, now felt completely powerless. Then, amid that helplessness, he witnessed something extraordinary. He saw Reynold gathering a mysterious energy in his palm before striking a massive boulder, shattering it in one blow. Arthur froze in astonishment. Even as a ruler of the world, he had never seen such power. What he witnessed wasn't mere brute strength. It was something beyond imagination. Reynold stood proudly, waiting for praise from his family. But he failed to notice the weakened rock behind him. It crumbled instantly, falling right on top of him. Alice, having anticipated something like this, rushed forward immediately. She began to heal him with magic, scolding him gently to be more careful next time, especially when showing off in front of them. Reynold loved to joke around, but when it came to real danger, he was no fool. He could kill a wild boar with a single strike. His strength made life easier for him and his family. After finishing his hunt, he would always return home eager to feel the warmth of his loved one's embrace. From all this, Arthur learned two vital lessons. First, this world was far more dangerous than he expected. Ordinary people never left their homes without carrying weapons. Second, if he wanted to live freely in this world, he needed to learn how to fight. When Reynold returned, Alice said it was time for a nap. Although Arthur disliked being treated like a child, the moment of sleep became one of his favorites. In his previous life, he had never known peaceful rest. He had lived in constant fear of assassins, even in his sleep. Though he always survived, the endless tension had slowly destroyed him. Months passed, and Arthur's body grew stronger, strong enough for him to crawl on his own. The first thing he did was crawl toward a mirror and stare at himself for a long time. To his parents, it was a cute act of curiosity from a baby. But to him, it was the discovery of his new face, trying to comprehend that this was truly his new form. Now that he could move freely, he decided to act. During the next nap time, while Alice was busy in the kitchen, he slipped away unnoticed. He crawled silently across the floor, reached the other side of the room, opened the library door, and pulled out a book from the shelf. Eager to learn about the world he now lived in, he discovered that the continent was called Decathlon, divided into three kingdoms. The Kingdom of Darkness, home to the dwarves who lived in massive underground cities. The Kingdom of Elenoir, homeland of the elves who dwelled deep within the forests. And finally, the Kingdom of Sapin, the human realm ruled by a monarch. Unlike his past world, no one here burned cities or massacred nations for power. For here, the crown was passed down by blood, not conquest. His curiosity deepened. Opening another book, he finally found the answers he sought. He learned that the level of technology in this world was relatively low, for people depended heavily on magic, a force drawn from energy called mana, which resided within their bodies. Though not everyone could use it, magic played an essential role in daily life. There were two primary ways to wield mana. The first was augmentation, which focused mana inside the body, granting the user immense strength, speed, and defense. The second was conjuring, allowing the user to release mana outside the body, to manipulate natural elements such as fire, water, and more. These insights helped Arthur understand the world better. Though he still couldn't find anything about the healing magic Alice had used earlier, he assumed it was a rare, specialized branch that only few could perform. He also learned that most people's mana awakened only at puberty, when they formed something called a mana core inside their bodies. Once mastered, that core turned them into true mages. For Arthur, this concept was easy to grasp. In his previous life, he had used an energy called Kai, which worked in almost the same way, so he decided to try focusing his mana, and it worked. His mana core began to form, marking a huge step forward, but before he could continue his training, Alice found him. Terrified after realizing his crib was empty, she rushed through the house until she spotted him. She hugged him tightly in relief until she caught a strange smell. Arthur froze, thinking she had discovered his secret training. But no, she had simply smelled something else. Once again, he had soiled himself. 2 years passed, and Alice sat by the window writing in her journal, smiling with quiet contentment. Arthur was growing strong and healthy, but one thing still troubled her. Since the day he was born, he had never once smiled. At that moment, her eyes caught sight of Reynold outside, training Arthur with a wooden sword. Arthur looked thrilled, swinging his little stick like a hero, but Alice's calm expression vanished instantly. How could Reynold hand a sword, no, even a stick, to a 2-year-old child? Arthur, of course, understood at once. When Alice got angry, it meant a state of emergency at home. He had learned very quickly who truly ruled the house. In fact, he began to suspect that women in this world might all possess that same terrifying authority. Later, Alice decided to take a stroll through the city, and Arthur was more excited than ever. It was the perfect chance to observe the outside world and gather information himself. He carefully studied the weapons displayed in shops, trying to gauge this world's level of technology. Then, something extraordinary caught his eye. A man conjuring flames in his palm, performing fire magic right before him. The day turned out to be incredibly productive, but his small body could no longer keep up. Exhaustion pressed on his eyelids. When they returned home, Alice immediately put him to bed, and though this new life left him helpless and dependent, he was starting to love it. For the first time, he felt the warmth of family. In his previous life, Arthur had been an orphan, raised in a cold, loveless orphanage. He had never once known the comfort of a mother's embrace or a father's gentle pat on the shoulder. This life was the greatest gift fate could ever have given him. The next morning, Arthur stood near the window, watching Reynold train in the garden. He was fascinated, eager to witness magic being used in real combat. He focused on every movement, memorizing each flow of mana inside his father's body. Every time Reynold channeled mana into his limbs, Arthur's curiosity burned brighter. He longed to try it himself. Just as he was about to sneak outside to train, Alice called from behind. "Come now, sweetheart, it's nap time." Still unable to speak properly, Arthur protested with a few childish gestures as he passed by the library. He wanted to read another book, but Alice said gently, yet firmly, "Not now." Later, normally, he would have had no choice but to obey. But recently, he had mastered a secret technique, the innocent face. He looked up at her with that irresistible expression, wide-eyed and pleading. Her sternness melted in an instant. "Fine," she sighed with a smile. "Take this book, read a little, then straight to bed." The moment she left him alone, he began practicing magic again. For 2 entire years, Arthur trained his control over mana until he finally succeeded. A fully formed mana core pulsed inside his body. It had taken immense effort, but the result was worth it. And with one final push of concentration, he felt ready to cast his very first spell. Excitement overwhelmed him. He poured all his mana at once. Too much. A flash of light burst from his hands, and the entire house exploded. Outside, Reynold and Alice had just stepped out when the blast hit. The shockwave burned Reynold's back as he shielded Alice, but both survived. Realizing Arthur was still inside, they sprinted back, burst through the wrecked doorway, and froze. Arthur stood in the middle of the ruins, completely unharmed. The child who hadn't even turned 3 had just activated real magic, something no one under 12 could possibly do. Arthur stood proudly amid the debris, but forgot that the ceiling above him was collapsing. A beam of wood cracked loose, falling fast. Before he could react, Reynold and Alice lunged forward. Alice shielded him with her body while Reynold used magic to deflect the debris. Arthur froze. It was the first time in his 2 lives that anyone had risked their life to protect him. Tears streamed down Alice's face as she clutched him tightly, and for the first time in his life, Arthur cried with her. In his past life, he had been merciless. He remembered the time an assassin was caught trying to kill him. The council wanted to send the man's wife and son to the torture camps. The assassin begged for mercy, but Arthur, cold and heartless, killed them all himself, saying that death was kinder than what awaited them. Now, everything was different. Instead of passing death sentences, he spent his days training beside his father. One morning, Reynold asked him to try on the enchanted gloves he had crafted, but Arthur replied calmly, "No, I'll use a sword." Reynold chuckled. "Fine then. Swords it is, but I'll enhance mine with mana." The shock came an instant later. Arthur did the same, and with a single swing, his blade cleaved Reynold's sword clean in 2. At that moment, Reynold realized that Arthur had grown beyond what ordinary training could offer. It was clear, the boy needed a true mentor, someone capable of refining his extraordinary talent. When Reynolds returned home and told Alice, she refused immediately. Her voice was firm. I will not send my son away to another city for training. We agreed. You teach him combat, and I teach him magic. But Reynolds saw what she could not. He was certain their child was no ordinary boy. He was a miracle. A child who could cut through a sword enhanced with mana could never be a mere trainee. He said seriously, he's different, Alice. This boy could become one of the strongest people in the world. He deserves a real teacher. Alice couldn't deny her son's gift. Yet the thought of sending him far away filled her with unease. The discussion soon turned into a heated argument, neither of them willing to yield. In the middle of their tension, Arthur sat quietly, watching them. Then he spoke in a calm, almost innocent tone. Why don't you both come with me to the city, instead of leaving me there alone? The parents exchanged surprised glances. It seemed neither had even thought of that. Then, both burst out laughing. This boy really is a genius, Reynolds said, grinning. The next morning, a large carriage arrived to take them to the city. They would be traveling with some of their old friends, those who had helped Reynolds and Alice rebuild their house after Arthur's earlier explosion. Their group was a unique one. The leader, a tall man with a bright smile, introduced himself as Adam. Next came Angela, cheerful and confident, followed by Durden, a young man with a calm demeanor. While Arthur looked around, he noticed a girl standing silently on top of the carriage. The others told him her name was Jasmine. The last to join them was Helen, the skilled archer of the team. Once introductions were over, everyone climbed into the carriage and the journey to the city began. Alice looked at her son and smiled. Are you happy, Arthur? This is your first long trip. He nodded, smiling faintly. But inside, he thought wryly. Unbelievable. They still use horse-drawn carriages here? In my previous world, I had an entire fleet of flying cars. The journey lasted an entire day. When they finally stopped to rest, the group began setting up camp until a pack of wolves appeared from the woods. The team reacted instantly. They fought with coordination and precision, taking down the beasts in moments. Arthur watched from a distance, eyes wide with awe. It was his first time witnessing a real battle. At that moment, he knew he had to grow stronger, strong enough to protect himself one day. With so much meat from the slain wolves, they decided to roast it for dinner. While everyone ate, Alice noticed a deep cut on Reynolds' arm and rushed to heal him. But Jasmine stopped her and said firmly, wait, not here. Everyone turned to her, puzzled. She continued in a serious tone, healers are rare in this world. If anyone sees you use that kind of magic, you could become a target. Alice understood and waited until it was safe, then healed him quietly with her gentle touch. Once things calmed down, Adam decided to spar with Arthur to test the boy's skills. He'd heard stories of the child's strength and wanted to see it for himself. Charging his spear with mana, Adam said, ready yourself. Arthur smiled lightly and answered not with words, but action. He focused, infused mana into his body, and the air around him shimmered. Then, in a blur, he vanished and reappeared before Adam in the blink of an eye. The move was so sudden it nearly caught Adam off guard, until Arthur stumbled and fell face first into the dirt. They continued briefly, but when Adam pushed him, the lightweight boy was flung into the air. He would have hit the ground hard if the others hadn't caught him in time. Calm down, Adam, he's just a kid, they scolded. Breathing heavily, Adam replied in honest disbelief, I couldn't help it, the boy's strong. His strikes throw me off balance. Reynolds must have trained him like a beast, but the truth was that Arthur hadn't learned from anyone. He had taught himself, using the experience of a former king in a child's body. Suddenly, Jasmine appeared behind him, making him flinch from her sudden closeness. She looked at him with a faint smile and said, can you teach me how you move mana through your legs like that? From her determined gaze, Arthur knew she wouldn't take no for an answer. He gave a shy smile and nodded. And so, for the first time, he became a teacher. The next day, the group continued their journey as planned, stopping occasionally to rest or train. During one break, Adam taught Arthur the basics of spear fighting, while Helen showed him how to aim with a bow. Having only known the sword in his past life, Arthur found these lessons refreshing and valuable. The following day, Jasmine handed him a small dagger as a gift of thanks for teaching her. Her expression was different now, gentler, warmer. She was beginning to admire him, even though she was not someone who trusted easily. But peace never lasts long. As they traveled, their convoy was ambushed by a large band of thieves. Dozens surrounded them from every direction. The leader of the bandits barked out an order, his voice sharp and cruel. Take the women and children alive. We'll sell them as slaves. His men charged in unison. The team fought fiercely. Reynolds' skill outshined everyone's, but their enemies were too many. Despite their strength, it was clear they wouldn't hold out forever. Then, the bandit leader struck Reynolds with a powerful blow, sending him crashing onto one of the wagons. He was badly wounded. Alice tried to rush to him, but he shouted, stop! If they learn you can heal, you'll be the first they target. Then he turned to Arthur, speaking through pain. Take her and run. Protect your mother. She's carrying a child. You're the older brother now. Arthur froze, stunned. But when Reynolds gave him a final nod, he understood. He began gathering mana, preparing to escape. Reynolds stood tall before the bandits, fighting with all his might to buy them time. The leader roared for his men to chase the fugitives, but Reynolds blocked their path like an unbreakable wall, his body burning with mana, his voice echoing through the air. This time, he wasn't fighting for pride or survival. He was fighting for his family, and no matter what happened next, surrender was not an option. At that moment, when part of the bandit group attacked, Adam and Jasmine drew their blades, cutting through the enemies to clear a path for Arthur and his mother to escape. Everyone in the team fought desperately to protect them, while Arthur did everything he could to lead Alice towards safety. In his first life, he had watched others die without feeling a thing. But now, his flight was not out of fear for himself, but out of fear of losing the ones he loved. After a few hurried steps, Arthur thought they were safe. But he was wrong. One of the bandits stood watching from a cliff above them. A skilled mage, already preparing a deadly spell. The air trembled before they could even react. The spell activated in an instant. Arthur barely managed to push Alice aside before the explosion struck. The blast hit him square in the chest, hurling his small body backward over the cliff's edge. For a child barely 3 years old, the fall from that height should have meant certain death. But Arthur refused to die alone. He remembered the dagger Jasmine had given him. He threw it at the mage with all his strength. The blade pierced the mage's leg, and the rope tied to its hilt tangled around him. Together, Arthur and the mage fell, both dragged into the abyss below. The other adventurers ran after them, trying to cast spells to slow their fall, but it was too late. The two figures vanished into the deep valley before anyone could reach them. As he plummeted, flashes of his past life returned. The wars, the cruelty, the loneliness. Yet, even facing death, his heart felt strangely calm. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to sacrifice for someone you love. He did not regret his choice. He only wished he could live again, not for power, not for revenge, but to be with the family he had finally come to love. When he awoke at the bottom of the valley, he found himself face to face with a massive creature, a being so large and awe-inspiring that its presence froze him in place. Instinctively, Arthur tried to defend himself, but the creature spoke in a calm, deep voice. "I did not come to harm you. I came to be your companion." Arthur hesitated, unsure if he could trust such a monstrous figure, but his body was in pain, his wounds severe, and he was too weak to move. The creature plucked glowing fruits hanging from the cave walls and placed them before him. "These will help you heal," it said gently. Arthur didn't trust food that grew from stone, and tried to stall by speaking, but pain seized him, forcing a cry from his throat. The creature looked at him in wonder. "For you to survive a fall like that, it's nothing short of a miracle." It refused to answer his questions until he ate something. Expecting a bitter taste, Arthur took a cautious bite, only to find the fruit astonishingly sweet. He ate another and another. It was the first real food he'd tasted in what felt like years. When he had regained some strength, he asked about his parents. The creature replied that it could not leave the cave, but it could see what was happening outside. With a motion of its claws, a glowing window appeared in the air. Through it, Arthur saw Alice and Reynolds fighting bravely, defeating the remaining bandits and saving the caravan. Relief washed over him like light. His heart soared with joy. He turned to the creature and thanked it from the depths of his heart. From that day forward, Arthur chose to trust his mysterious savior. The creature introduced itself as Sylvie. Despite its fearsome form, it was kind and gentle. Over the following days, Arthur recovered under Sylvie's care. She watched over him patiently, ensuring his wounds healed and his strength returned. When he was finally able to move again, he spoke of returning to his family. But Sylvie warned him, leaving now would be impossible. "You're standing at the edge of the elven forest, and the lands beyond are filled with beasts and thieves. At your current level, you would not survive." Yet she had a unique ability. She could open a portal with her horns to send him somewhere safe. It would take time and great power to prepare. Until then, Arthur decided to train. He shaped a stick into a makeshift sword and practiced daily while enjoying Sylvie's company. He knew little about her past, but sensed that she carried old wounds of her own. One day, as he meditated on his forming mana core, Sylvie gathered an immense amount of mana and performed a grand spell before him. He watched, wide-eyed, unable to breathe from awe. "If I can learn this art," he thought, "I could become unstoppable." He was grateful. Yet when Sylvie asked softly, "Why do you seek power, Arthur?" he answered without hesitation, "I want to use my power to kill anyone who threatens me." Her expression hardened. With a swift motion, she struck him lightly on the forehead. Her voice, though calm, carried authority. "I do not teach my craft to those who think that way." Arthur didn't understand her anger. To him, revenge was only natural, but to Sylvie, it was the very path that led to darkness. Sylvia raised her forefinger toward Arthur's head and said in a calm, serious voice, "With a single touch I can split your head open, or I can touch you gently. Which do you prefer?" Arthur did not hesitate for a moment and answered, his voice trembling, "The gentle touch, of course." Sylvia smiled faintly. Anger and hatred are the easiest path, but once you let them rule you, your life becomes an empty circle of bitterness and endless revenge. That is the last life I want for you. Then she asked again, "Then, what will you use your strength for?" This time, Arthur thought honestly. He did not recall his pain or the bandit's betrayal. He remembered his parents' and friends' laughter. He smiled lightly and said, "I want to use my strength to protect those I love." Sylvia's face lit at that answer, her happiness showing despite herself. Yet outside, beyond the cave walls, there was another beast, one that resembled Sylvia to a startling degree, who had long been tracking her and had finally drawn near. Sylvia began teaching Arthur her personal technique, showing him how to focus mana around his body. With each new training, Arthur felt his strength rising little by little until joy filled his heart and he ran to her to thank her for what she had taught him. Suddenly, Sylvia stopped, the color draining from her face. "Someone is approaching," she said in a low voice. She shoved Arthur hard against the wall and covered him with conjured stone, whispering, "Be silent. Do not move." Arthur froze, not understanding, then peered through the cracks to see a massive creature enter the cave. It was almost the mirror of Sylvia herself. She looked at it in startled fear and asked anxiously, "How did you find me here?" It answered coldly, "Return with me at once, or I will be forced to kill you." Sylvia refused, and battle erupted. The intruder had not come to jest, but for a grave purpose unknown to her. He attacked savagely. The cave quaked under the blows, while Arthur watched from behind the rocks, hearing her voice in his mind. "Do not worry about me." The creature tried to compel her to return. She insisted on refusing, ready to die before yielding. Sylvia gathered her power. Light burst around her as she revealed her true form, a majestic dragon whose vast wings filled the cave. In her true shape, she could wield tremendous power. She hurled a massive fireball at her foe, but he deflected it with contempt. "You are being foolish. Your body cannot endure this much power." Sylvia knew it, but she did not care. She had lived a long, quiet life and was ready to sacrifice herself. She drove him into the wall. He rose and answered with a violent strike that tore the cave's side, leaving her grievously wounded. What worried her was not the pain, but the battle drawing close to Arthur's hiding place. She saw the creature launch a finishing blow that would have struck the child. She had no choice but to use the last of her strength. Time halted. In the stillness that filled the cave, she called to Arthur with sorrow and tenderness. "Come out now, Arthur." He emerged, stunned, wanting to ask about her being a dragon, but time was short. She spoke quickly, her voice faltering. "Time is brief. I have opened the portal I prepared for you, but it will not take you straight home. My wounds have weakened me. It may send you elsewhere, but to safety. What matters is that you leave this forest." Then she looked at him with a trusting smile and said, "I believe in you. You can rely on yourself now, and one day you will return in peace." She asked him one last time, "What will you use your strength for?" He answered without hesitation, "To protect my family." Sylvia smiled in deep relief. "That is what I wanted to hear." Before he departed, she said, "Wait, I have something to give you." A small egg and a glowing feather appeared before him, both radiating strange energy. "Wrap the egg with this feather and keep them safe. They are a trust in your hands." Then she reached out and touched his arm. In an instant, black markings appeared, covering Arthur's forearm. He recoiled in fear. "What is this? What is happening to me?" Sylvia smiled weakly. "You will understand their meaning one day, but sadly, I will not be here to explain it to you." She fell silent, then looked at him with tearful eyes. "I could have sent you back to your family from the first day, but I was happy with your presence and could not let you go. Now, I have put you in danger because of my selfishness." Arthur was moved and said with painful sincerity, "I do not care whether you are a dragon or human. You are part of my family, and I will never forget what you did for me." Sylvia laughed through her tears. "I am proud of you, Arthur. But now you must go." Just before he stepped through the portal, he stopped and looked back. "Come with me." She smiled sadly. "I cannot. Time is up." She closed the portal swiftly, and it swallowed him away. The instant time resumed, the creature struck Sylvia with a killing blow, and she fell. He approached, doubtful she had truly died. But as he leaned in, Sylvia gathered the last of her strength and unleashed a colossal burst of flame that incinerated him and everything around. As Arthur traveled within the portal, he heard Sylvia's voice in the depths of his ear, warm with motherly gentleness. "Do you remember when I asked you what you would use your strength for?" He answered softly, tears and longing in his voice. "I remember, but I am so sad." She spoke with tender wisdom. The world truly is sad, Arthur, full of pain, but that is why you must change it. I want to change it, Sylvia, he said. Her final words faded like echoes. Know that you do not have to change it all at once. Change it step by step. You were once a king, and I know your past, but this time, be a king with a pure heart, without hatred and without injustice. Arthur awoke lying on the forest floor, clutching the egg and the glowing feather Sylvia had given him. He swore to keep his promise, but first, he needed to find a way out of the forest where the portal had cast him, the elven forest. Every step he took was heavy with tension and uncertainty. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the silence. A girl screamed for help. Arthur gathered mana in his legs and dashed toward the sound at full speed. He leapt up a tall tree to see from above, and what he saw froze his blood. A group of bandits had captured a young elven girl, binding and gagging her as she struggled to break free. Their intentions were obvious. They planned to sell her on the black market for a high price. The scene dragged Arthur's mind back to the day his own family had been attacked by bandits, to the same vile words about selling women and children into misery. Rage flared within him instantly. He wanted to kill them all. But then, Sylvia's voice echoed in his heart. Control your anger. He remembered her lesson, forcing himself to calm down and think. A reckless attack could endanger the girl's life, so he decided to wait, to strike only when the time was right. He hid in the shadows and waited until the sun disappeared and darkness fell. When night swallowed the camp, Arthur moved silently. He noticed the bandits had chained several wolves nearby. It was strange. Wolves never obey humans. Then he saw it, glowing collars around their necks, enchanted to enslave them. A quick idea flashed in his mind. A few stones and threw them at the wolves, stirring chaos to distract the guards. Confusion spread through the camp. The leader barked orders, sending one man to silence the beasts. When the man approached and struck a wolf harshly, Arthur seized the chance. He dropped from the tree behind him, summoned a mana blade, and ended him in an instant. Another guard rushed over, only to meet the same fate, but the strain was catching up to Arthur's small body. He had to finish this quickly. A third man joined the fight and managed to wound him, shouting for help before Arthur could silence him. The alarm was raised. The bandit leader realized the attacker was a young mage, valuable prey. Killing him would be wasteful. Capturing him meant profit. He gathered mana in his arm and lunged forward. Arthur countered with a fiery strike, but his dagger slipped away. The leader caught it and turned it against him. Arthur fell, and the man grabbed him by the leg, lifting him like prey. It was clear the boy was no match for a grown fighter. Desperate, Arthur used the last of his mana. A burst of flame scorched the man's knee, and his scream filled the air. Arthur lunged, snatched the dagger and drove it straight into the man's head. The leader dropped dead. The last bandit, wounded earlier, tried to flee, but Arthur finished him as well. Then he ran toward the wagon where the elven girl was trapped. She looked pale and terrified, unaware of what had happened. Arthur told her softly that the bandits were gone and she was safe now. Her name was Tessia. When she reached for his hand to step down, she noticed blood on his arm and gasped, asking if he was hurt. Seeing her fear, Arthur told her to stay back, then covered the corpses with blankets. He didn't want her young eyes to witness such horror. After a while, she asked about the others who'd been captured with her. He hid the truth, saying gently that it was only a small incident, that everything was fine now. She didn't question him further. He fetched her bag from the wagon and told her she could go home. But Tessia grabbed his hand tightly, begging him not to leave her alone. She was trembling, too scared to cross the forest by herself. Though Arthur knew the direction, he had no idea how far her home was. He didn't want to delay his journey, yet he couldn't abandon her either. So he agreed to escort her to the forest's edge. He noticed the wolves the bandits had enslaved and thought of using them for travel, but he didn't know how to control them. Tessia suggested removing the collars to set them free. Arthur hesitated. What if they turned on them? But she reassured him softly, they won't. I didn't hurt them. The forest protects its own. He trusted her words. When the collars were removed, the wolves gazed at them for a moment, then turned and vanished peacefully into the dark woods. In the next morning, Arthur and Tessia began their journey toward the elven village. After walking for some time, they decided to rest and share a meal. Arthur prepared a simple soup of dried meat and salt, saying gently, "You should eat. You'll need your strength for the long road ahead." Tessia sniffed the aroma shyly and said, "It smells a little strange." Arthur smiled. "I'm no great cook, but it's better than nothing." Quietly for a while, until Tessia, curious, asked, "Why did you come to the elven forest? Humans don't usually enter here, especially alone." Arthur told her he'd been separated from his family by mistake, then asked about her life in return. Tessia smiled softly. "My parents are always busy, so I spend most of my time with my grandfather and the servants. Grandfather loves me very much." The journey continued, but since Tessia didn't know how far the village was, they couldn't guess how long it would take. Worse, The wolves they had freed earlier began following them from a distance. Arthur regretted not killing them. He feared they might attack later. When night fell, he decided to stay awake outside the tent to guard Tessia. A few minutes later, she stepped out, her voice trembling. "Come inside. It's cold." He replied quietly, "I'm fine. I don't need sleep," but the truth was clear. She was afraid to be alone. Seeing that, Arthur smiled and went inside. He sat awake near the tent's entrance, watching over her. Tessia tried to look brave, but her shaking shoulders betrayed her. "Stay close to me," she whispered softly, then turned to her side and fell asleep. The night passed peacefully. No wolves, no danger. By morning, they resumed their path. Tessia was beginning to feel comfortable around Arthur, slowly forgetting the horror of the slave traders. Still, she struggled with simple survival tasks. When they reached a shallow pond, she couldn't cross it on her own, so Arthur lifted her in his arms and carried her across. But halfway through, he felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, his heartbeat pounding violently. He leaned against a tree, gasping for breath. Tessia, worried, ran off to find healing herbs. But Arthur realized this pain wasn't from sickness. It was something else entirely. While he sat catching his breath, the same wolf they'd seen earlier appeared before him. He tensed, unable to stand or fight. When Tessia returned with the herbs, Arthur warned her to stay back. But what happened next left them both speechless. The wolf dropped a dead boar in front of them, then quietly walked away. Arthur froze in disbelief, while Tessia smiled softly and said, "Maybe it wanted to thank you for freeing it." That night they sat beside the fire, roasting the boar's meat. Tessia laughed as she took a bite. "It tastes so much better than your soup." Arthur chuckled under his breath. While he dozed, Tessia began telling him stories about the kingdoms of humans and dwarves. "My grandfather used to read them to me," she said, smiling wistfully. Then, gazing into the flames, she added, "I always dreamed of seeing those lands myself. But we elves don't trust the other races." When she saw that Arthur had fallen asleep, she gently covered him with a blanket and whispered, "Good night." The next morning, they continued onward, but the pain in Arthur's chest had grown worse. "I'm sorry," Tessia said softly. "I don't know how to help you." He smiled faintly. "It's all right. It's not your fault." They exchanged light jokes, and Arthur found himself thinking something he'd never felt before. For the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. Tessia was his first true friend. Suddenly, Tessia stopped and gasped. Arthur looked up. Before them stood a massive tree, and at its center shimmered a glowing gate. She turned to him with a bright smile and said, "This is the entrance to the elven village. Come with me." But the elves still despised humans. The moment Arthur stepped through the gate, soldiers seized him and pointed their blades at his throat. He looked to Tessia, hoping she'd speak for him, but she stood silent, her face cold and distant. Betrayal struck him like a blade. He thought she had deceived him, led him here to die. His chest burned with bitter self-mockery. How foolish he'd been to believe he could have a friend. One of the guards raised his sword to strike, and then Tessia screamed, "Stop!" A guard warned her sharply. "This human is dangerous." But she cried out, tears trembling in her voice. "He's not dangerous. He saved my life." Her words should have calmed them, but the elves believed she was under a human spell. Tension thickened, until a commanding voice echoed across the square. "Leave the boy." An elder stepped forward. Virion, Tessia's grandfather, and the former king of the elves. Wise and calm, his presence silenced the crowd. He believed his granddaughter's story and turned to Arthur with solemn respect. "The sudden return of our missing princess with a human might raise suspicion," he said, "but I believe your words." Relief flooded Arthur. He would live. Yet shock soon followed when he learned the truth. Tessia was an elf princess. He had spent days beside her without knowing. Moments later, her parents arrived in haste. Tessia ran into their arms crying with joy. They were the current king and queen of the elves, but unlike Virion, their hearts were less forgiving. The king's eyes flared with fury when he saw Arthur. "What is this filthy human doing in my kingdom? Arrest him at once." No one moved. Virion's voice had already echoed through their hearts. "Leave him." All feared the old king's authority. He said firmly, "This boy saved our princess. He deserves honor, not chains." Tessia pleaded with her father to let Arthur stay in the palace as a guest. The king hesitated. Allowing a human into elven lands was forbidden, but in the end, he yielded to his daughter's tearful insistence, granting Arthur permission to enter the palace, against every rule their kingdom had ever known. That evening, after everything had been settled, everyone began preparing to head toward the palace. Before leaving, Virion turned to Arthur and said calmly, "I wish to speak with you later, boy." Arthur felt a ripple of unease. He could sense this man's overwhelming strength, yet before he could dwell on it, Tessia grabbed his hand with bright, childish energy. "Come, I'll show you the kingdom." It was the first time Arthur had ever seen the elven kingdom. He was awestruck. Towering trees that touched the sky, radiant bridges of light connecting high wooden dwellings, all shimmering in the glow of nature's mana. But the wonder faded as he noticed the cold, silent stairs. Every elf who caught sight of him stopped what they were doing, watching him in quiet disdain as he walked beside their princess. No one dared approach. After all, he was officially a royal guest. Yet their eyes spoke volumes of their hatred. Only Tessia treated him with genuine kindness. Still, one question lingered painfully in his heart. Why had she stayed silent when they were about to kill me? The strange pain in his chest returned, an ache growing worse each day, with no clear cause. When they reached the palace, the servants received him with formal courtesy, following Tessia's direct order that Arthur be treated with full respect despite being human. Once everything was arranged, she turned to him with a playful grin. "Come on, let's play a bit." But Arthur replied gently, "Before that, I want to speak with your parents. They'll want to know what happened." She nodded and they went together to the royal meeting chamber. The room was prepared elegantly. Servants brought fruit and tea, and the atmosphere resembled a quiet royal banquet. But the subject of the meeting was far from light. The king stepped forward, his voice composed and regal. "My name is Alduir, king of the elves. This is my wife, Queen Muriel, and my father, Virian Arthur, bowed respectfully. It's an honor to meet you all. I am but a simple boy from the kingdom of Sapin. I know my presence here is unusual, perhaps even bold, so I thank you deeply for your hospitality." Alduir studied him closely, surprised. A young boy who speaks with such composure? Intriguing. "But tell us, what exactly happened to our daughter?" Arthur began recounting everything. How he'd been separated from his family after the bandit attack, how he'd wandered into the elven forest, and how he saved Tessia from the slave traders. But he deliberately omitted one truth: his encounter with Sylvia. When Alduir heard about the slavers, fury ignited in his voice. "How dare humans attempt to sell an elven princess?" Virian spoke calmly. "Continue, boy. How did you save her?" Arthur answered plainly, without hesitation. "I killed them all." A murmur rippled among the guards. One of them said doubtfully, "Impossible. A child could never defeat an entire group of slave traders alone." But Virian's sharp gaze silenced him instantly. "If you doubt my words," he said coldly, "you may resign from your post this moment." The hall fell silent. No one dared respond. The king exhaled, his anger fading into contemplation. "It seems you speak the truth. You did save my daughter." He softened slightly. "Do you desire a reward for what you've done?" Arthur shook his head. "I only wish to return to my homeland. I was separated from my family during the attack, and I need help finding my way back to Sapien." Alduir's expression tightened. A human asking aid from the royal family of the elves. How peculiar. Once again Virian intervened, firm but gentle. "He risked his life to protect my granddaughter. The least we can do is return the favor." Alduir sighed, realizing that both his father and daughter would be furious if he refused. "Very well," he said reluctantly. "We will help you. But there is a problem." He leaned back in his throne. "The teleportation gate to the kingdom of Sapin is sealed. It opens only once every 7 years during the meeting of the 3 kingdoms. It has been 2 years since the last gathering." Arthur's eyes widened. "So, I must wait 5 years? The king nodded. "I'm afraid so. And keeping a human within elven lands for that long is strictly forbidden." He paused, then added, "I will send a squad of soldiers to escort you to the border. From there, you must find your own path." Arthur thanked him sincerely, though the pain in his chest flared sharply again. Virian noticed at once and ordered that a room be prepared for him to rest, complete with food and a bath. Later, in the quiet of his room, the ache only worsened. He stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the cold night air, hoping it would ease the pain. Above him, on the higher balcony, stood Tessia and her family, speaking softly. He froze, his heart tightening painfully. Memories of Reynold and Elise, his parents, rushed through his mind. Were they still alive? He believed they were. They were strong, but how he longed just to hear their voices again. Then Tessia saw him. She noticed the sorrow in his eyes, quickly ended her conversation, and ran down to him. When she reached him, she said softly, almost shyly, "I'm sorry for how my father treated you." Arthur smiled faintly. "I'm not angry. I understand him. There's a long history of war between humans and elves. It's natural for a father to worry about his daughter." She studied him quietly, then spoke with gentle warmth. "Don't let that sadness consume you. Your parents would be proud of you if they saw you now." She raised her hands and cupped his face tenderly, as if wiping away the shadows from his thoughts. "Even if you don't know where they are, I'm certain they love you, just as my parents love me." Suddenly, glowing butterflies filled the corridor, drifting in waves of light. The scene was enchanting, and for a moment, Arthur remembered his parents' faces, their laughter when he was born. He realized how foolish he'd been to ever doubt their love. But before the moment could settle, something surged toward them. Swift and unseen, instinct took over. Arthur moved instantly, raised his hand and blocked the incoming strike. He prepared to counterattack, but froze in shock when he saw who the attacker was. "Lord Virian." "Why?" The old elf lowered his hand calmly and smiled. Relax, it was merely a flash of harmless light. I wanted to test your reflexes for myself, to see if you truly were as strong as they said. The boy who single-handedly defeated the slave traders. Arthur had truly proven his skill in combat, but Tessia ran toward her grandfather in outrage, shouting, "Stop it, Grandpa! That's enough. No more games." Varian smiled calmly, his deep voice steady and firm. "I'm not playing, Tessia. I have a far greater purpose." Then he turned his gaze to Arthur, his eyes sharp with intent. "I want to duel you myself, to measure your true strength." He raised his hand, and a glowing, ethereal sword formed from pure mana. "Step back, Tessia," he said softly. "I don't want you getting hurt." Arthur nodded silently. With a burst of energy, he charged forward, channeling mana through his entire body. But Varian was faster, much faster. Every strike Arthur threw was deflected with a single effortless motion of the Elder's blade. Even when Arthur enhanced his speed to the limit, he couldn't touch him. Then, at last, a narrow opening appeared. He struck with all his might, his mana flaring like fire. But Varian parried with impeccable grace. Arthur's sword shattered in two, and a flying shard hurtled toward Tessia. Without hesitation, Arthur threw what remained of his broken blade, intercepting the shard midair before it could reach her. Varian's eyes softened with genuine admiration, but Arthur was not done. He refocused his mana and lunged once more. Still, the difference in their strength was overwhelming. No matter how fiercely he fought, he couldn't land a single decisive hit, yet he refused to give up. Suddenly, he feinted left, twisted his stance, and darted upward, then tapped Varian lightly on the forehead with his broken hilt. The strike caused no harm, but the old king froze, startled. He had actually been touched. His defenses breached for an instant. He stepped back, lowering his sword with a faint laugh. At that moment, Tessia stormed over, her voice trembling with frustration. "Enough! I'm sick of watching you bully him." Arthur chuckled softly. "I'm fine," he said, smiling. "It's an honor that your grandfather wanted to test me himself." Varian's expression turned serious, and his next words caught everyone off guard. "I want to take you as my apprentice, Arthur." Arthur froze in disbelief. "You're serious?" Varian's tone was absolute, steady, commanding. "I do not joke about such things. Will you accept?" Arthur hesitated. To be trained by Varian, the legendary former king of the elves. It was an offer beyond imagination, but his thoughts turned to his parents. Were Reynold and Elise still alive? Varian noticed his hesitation and spoke in a calm, decisive tone. "Do not worry. I know a way you can contact your family immediately." Arthur's eyes widened. That was all he'd wanted, just to hear their voices again. But before he could answer, the pain in his chest flared violently, sharper than ever before. Varian moved quickly, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "I see now," he said gravely. "You've inherited the will of an ancient beast. If you do not train under me soon, that will consume you." Arthur froze, his heart pounding in shock. An ancient beast's will? Inside him? That night he lay awake, unable to close his eyes. His mind churned with everything. His distance from home, the strange power inside him, and the possibility of dying before he ever saw his parents again. When he finally drifted off, nightmares claimed him. He saw a monstrous figure crawling toward him from the darkness, a whisper echoing through the void, calling his name. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, and found Tessia leaning over him, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up," she said, laughing nervously despite her worry. "You were talking in your sleep. Something about a monster you were fighting." He wiped the sweat from his brow, breathing deeply. She tilted her head with a grin. "Come on, Grandpa's waiting for you outside. Hurry and get dressed." Still dizzy, Arthur stood and began changing. Then Tessia asked softly, "So, have you decided? Will you stay and become my grandfather's student?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure yet. If he truly can help me contact my family, then I'll stay." Once ready, they headed down together. As they opened the doors to the hall, they heard raised voices. King Alduir was furious, shouting at his father. "I will not allow a human to live among us. It violates every law we have." But Varian stood firm, unshaken. "My decision is final. I will train him myself, and no one will change my mind." Tessia tried to defend Arthur, but her father refused to listen. His anger only deepened seeing his daughter stand beside the human boy. At last, Varian cut through the argument, his tone cold and absolute. "Enough. Arthur, Tessia, come with me. We're leaving for a short journey." They boarded a carriage and rode deep through forests and open plains. Tessia, resting her head on the seat, soon drifted into sleep. Arthur watched the passing scenery for a while before asking quietly, "Will it take long to reach our destination?" Varian smiled faintly. "Not long. And if all goes well, if you truly become my apprentice, then you'll be part of this family." He wasn't angry about Arthur's presence. In fact, he seemed genuinely glad. He'd noticed something precious. Tessia had finally found someone she could laugh with, someone who treated her like a normal girl rather than a princess. She had always been lonely, burdened by her royal blood. Children her age avoided her, and those who approached her sought only favor. Every friend she'd ever made had left her behind, until Arthur came. For the first time in years, she smiled and laughed freely. and Virion was thankful for that. Arthur too carried his own walls of mistrust, but every time he looked at Virion, he sensed honesty and warmth. Bit by bit, his guarded heart began to ease, and for the first time since awakening in this world, he started to believe that maybe he could trust again. At last, they arrived at their destination. Arthur gently shook Tessia awake, and the two stepped down from the carriage. Excitement flickered in Arthur's eyes. He couldn't wait to meet the mysterious person Virion had spoken of, someone powerful enough to help him reach his family. Without hesitation, Virion strode toward a small wooden house and knocked hard on the door. "Rinia, open up, it's me!" he shouted. When no response came, he leaned closer, pressing his ear to the door, only for it to swing open suddenly and slam right into his face. Arthur stifled a laugh as Virion rubbed his nose, muttering something under his breath. Then, stepping aside, Virion introduced them with dignity despite the mishap. "This," he said, "is Rinia, a remarkable mage who may be able to help you contact your family." Rinia, a young woman with sharp eyes and an air of mystery, invited them in. The interior of her home was simple: shelves of books, faint incense, and a wooden table with a single bucket of clear water. Arthur blinked in confusion. "A bucket of water? That's how she's going to help me?" As if sensing his thoughts, Rinia smiled faintly. "I belong to a rare lineage of mages," she said. "Those who can glimpse both past and future. But such sight comes at a cost. You must focus your heart." She gestured toward the bucket. "Look into the water. Picture your family. Remember every detail of them as vividly as you can." Arthur obeyed, closing his eyes. A soft hum filled the air as Rinia's mana flowed into the water. The surface rippled, then stilled, and suddenly an image bloomed before him. He saw his mother, Alice, in the kitchen, finishing the dish everyone loved. The same meal Reynold adored. But without Arthur, the table felt lifeless. Neither knew whether their son was dead or alive after his fall from the cliff. Reynold bore the heaviest guilt. He often sat in silence, haunted by the thought that he had failed as a father. At times, he even reached for the bottle, desperate to drown the pain, but stopped each time, remembering his pregnant wife and the life he still had to protect. He decided finally that they would move to the city and start anew. He worked tirelessly at a humble job, saved enough to buy a small home, and tried to build a new life for Alice. Yet no comfort could mend the wound of losing their son. Then, one quiet evening, a voice echoed through the house, soft but clear. "Mom, Dad, can you hear me?" They froze. The sound was unmistakable, but they saw no one. Fear flickered in Alice's eyes. "Is it his spirit?" she whispered. "No," Arthur said quickly. "It's really me. I'm alive. I'm in the Elven Kingdom now. I don't know how it happened, but a friend helped me use a spell that lets me talk to you." Tears filled Alice's eyes. Reynolds stood frozen, unable to breathe. "I want to come home," Arthur said softly, "but my body's too weak right now. If I try to return before I recover, I might die. Please don't blame yourselves. It was my choice to do what I did. If I could go back, I'd still make the same decision, to protect you both." For a few precious minutes, their voices mingled across worlds, half joy, half sorrow. When the vision faded, Arthur's cheeks were wet with tears. He made himself a silent promise. They will never have to worry about me again. To keep that promise, he had to grow stronger. Turning to Virion, he bowed his head deeply. "Please, make me your student. I want to learn from you, but there was a problem." Alduir, king of the elves, still refused to allow a human within his realm. Tessia stepped forward, her voice fierce but respectful. "Father, you can't cast him out. He saved my life. How would that make you look before your people?" Alduir frowned. "His presence could cause political chaos. You don't understand the risk." But Virion ended the debate with a single sentence, his tone sharp and commanding. "I've made my decision. From this moment, Arthur is my disciple." No one dared to oppose him. And so, Arthur received formal permission to stay in the royal palace. Later that evening, Alduir himself approached him. He sighed, looking less a king and more a tired father. "I don't like humans," he said honestly, "but you're different. You saved my daughter. For that, you have my respect. Consider yourself part of this family." Arthur was taken aback by the sudden change of heart, but it made sense. Tessia and Virion had stood by him unwaveringly. He bowed and said gratefully, "I'm honored. I'll do my best not to disappoint you." But Tessia, full of energy, wasn't satisfied with words. "A real welcome needs fun," she said with a grin. "He should come outside and play with me." Alduir exhaled heavily, but smiled at last. If that's what you wish, then so be it. Let him be treated as one of us. Before he could say another word, Tessia grabbed Arthur's hand and dashed out of the palace, her laughter echoing down the marble halls. She showed him the splendor of their city, trees crowned with crystals, bridges woven from pure light, and streams that glowed under moonfire. Then, with a sparkle in her eyes, she said, "There's a shop nearby that sells the best sweets. Hurry, or they'll be gone." They raced through the streets, laughing, until Arthur accidentally bumped into someone. A young elf glared at him with contempt. "How dare a filthy human touch me?" he snapped. Arthur blinked, trying to stay calm. He simply wanted to walk away, but the boy's rage grew louder. Turning toward Tessia, he shouted, "Why are you wasting time with this low-born human? You should be with me." His name was Frizz, son of an elven noble, arrogant, spoiled, and proud. Arthur gave him a faint, mocking smile and deliberately mispronounced his name. Frizz went red with fury. Feigning innocence, Arthur said lightly, "My mistake. I'll make sure to show you proper respect next time." Then he turned away and continued walking beside Tessia, quietly laughing to himself. But Friss wasn't a fool. He saw the glint of sarcasm in Arthur's eyes. He realized the boy had mocked him deliberately, and at that moment, Friss's pride ignited with burning hatred. He swore silently to himself. He would not let this insolence pass unpunished. At that moment, Friss decided that the only way to regain his pride was to challenge Arthur to a duel, an act he considered far too important to let go. Before the tension could grow worse, Tessia stepped forward and stood firmly between them, her tone sharp and unwavering. "You've gone too far, Frizz. I don't care if you're a noble. This is beyond reason." But Friss refused to back down. His smirk returned, laced with arrogance. "This is my right," he said coldly. "Anyone who insults my name deserves to face me in battle." Tessia didn't yield. She crossed her arms and reminded him clearly, "Then you must have a short memory. Arthur isn't an ordinary boy. He's Virian's personal disciple, the strongest man in the entire kingdom. If you challenge him, you're challenging Virian himself. That's not courage. That's stupidity." Yet her warning only inflated his pride further. Fries lifted his chin with a self-assured grin. "It's impossible for me to lose to a human. And if he refuses to fight, that means he's dishonoring Virian's name." Arthur sighed quietly, puzzled at how a spoiled child could treat something so trivial with such gravity. In his previous world, duels were fought to the death, not to defend fragile pride. But when he noticed the nobles gathered around, watching the scene like an amusing show, he understood. Duels here were not lethal. They were a display of skill and dignity. So he decided not to refuse. After all, running away was never in his nature. "Tessia," he said calmly as she tugged on his sleeve, her voice filled with worry. "Are you sure about this?" He gave her a steady look and replied simply, "I accept." The crowd murmured as Frizz stepped into the training arena, holding his polished staff with arrogant confidence. He smirked, convinced victory was already his. Then the match began. A flash, a movement too fast for the eye to follow, and in a single second, it was over. Arthur's first strike landed perfectly. Friss collapsed to the ground unconscious, his staff rolling from his limp hand. Gasps filled the air. The nobles rushed forward, trying to wake Fries, disbelief written across their faces. Tessia didn't look surprised at all. She had known this would happen from the start. She grabbed Arthur's hand, laughing lightly. "Come on, we're not done yet. There's still so much I want to show you." Together they wandered through the glowing streets, visiting shops and marveling at the beauty of the elven capital. Eventually they found a quiet balcony overlooking the forest, where they sat to rest. Tessia turned to him, curiosity bright in her eyes. "When will you start training with Grandpa Virian?" "Tomorrow morning," Arthur replied, but his expression was distant. His thoughts returned to Virian's warning, that the training would be grueling, and that he would have to endure it alone, far from his family. He remembered the old elf's serious question, "Are you truly ready for what lies ahead?" And his own calm answer, "I'm ready." He knew the road ahead would be long and harsh, but his resolve was firm. He would reach his goal no matter what, to become strong enough to shape his destiny and protect everyone he loved. Tessia smiled and said teasingly, "Then I'll train too. I won't let you get stronger than me." Years passed in a blur of training and laughter. Arthur and Tessia grew side by side, their rivalry sharpening their skills with every passing day. One morning, they saw Virian preparing to attend an important meeting. "What's it about?" Arthur asked curiously, but Tessia quickly changed the subject with a grin. "I made you a special burger today," she announced proudly, raising an eyebrow. "You better thank me properly for all my effort." Arthur took a bite, pretending to think deeply, then said with a mischievous smile, "It's fine. Average." Her face turned bright red. "Average?" she shouted, while he laughed under his breath, perfectly satisfied with her reaction. After breakfast, they headed to the training grounds under Virian's supervision. They began with hand-to-hand combat, testing each other's movements until Virian handed them both wooden swords. "Let's see how you handle real technique," he said. Arthur twirled his sword playfully. "Ready to lose again?" But this time Tessia didn't take the bait. She smirked confidently. Today, my goal is to knock some manners into you. Their wooden blades clashed again and again. Days turned into weeks as their training advanced, until Virion finally gathered them both and said gravely, "It's time you learn about magic." He began his lesson. When a person opens the mana channels within their body, they gain the power to control one of the 4 basic elements: fire, water, air, or earth. The element you align with depends partly on your race. Elves are naturally attuned to air, while humans are often more balanced across all 4. Dwarves excel in fire and earth, and other races have their own affinities. Then he added, some rare individuals, very rare, can control more than one element. Tessia, listening intently, asked, "Then why doesn't Arthur train using his mana like I do?" Virion's tone softened. "Because he's still unstable inside. There's something within him called the will of the beast. It disrupts the harmony between his body and mana. That's why he sometimes feels pain in his chest." Arthur suspected immediately that it had something to do with Sylvia, the dragon who had once saved him, but he chose not to speak of it yet. Virion placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "To solve this, we must first understand exactly what lies within you." Tessia laughed suddenly. "So does that mean he's in pain every time I hit him?" Arthur smiled faintly. "Yes, and you hit really hard." Virion chuckled quietly, then continued. He explained that elves usually awaken their mana channels at the age of 10, but Tessia's had activated early while she was still 9. And in her sleep no less, destroying her room completely in the process. That memory reminded Arthur of his own first awakening, when as a child he had blown up his family's house by accident. From that day forward, Tessia trained beside him with fierce determination, and their sessions turned into a daily contest of strength and spirit. Then came the day Virion declared it was time to confront the beast's will within Arthur. "If the ritual succeeds," he said, "you'll no longer feel pain, and you'll awaken as a true beast tamer." Arthur sat cross-legged, eager and nervous, as Virion began the spell. "I'll ignite a small flame within your mana core," the elder said. "You'll feel only mild warmth." But the instant the ritual began, everything went wrong. Something deep inside Arthur roared awake. He screamed in agony as a wave of mana exploded from his body, throwing Virion and Tessia across the chamber. When the light finally faded, Arthur lay unconscious on the floor. Realizing the gravity of what had happened, Virion lifted him gently and carried him back to the palace, watching over him until he finally stirred. When Arthur's eyes opened, Virion asked quietly, "Tell me, boy, do you know what the beast's will inside you truly is?" Arthur swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "It's the will of a dragon." For a long moment Virion said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "I suspected as much." His expression turned solemn. "Listen carefully, Arthur. Dragons are ancient, powerful beings. If anyone learns what lies within you, they will hunt you. For power, for greed, for fear. You must promise me. Tell no one." Arthur met his gaze and nodded firmly. "I promise." As the days passed, his body stabilized, his strength grew, and the pain in his chest began to fade. One morning, Virion entered his chamber with a gentle smile. "Good news, Arthur. You can return to your family in 4 months." Arthur's eyes widened. 4 months? I thought it would take at least 2 years. Virion chuckled softly. "In 4 months, there will be a great cultural exchange between the 3 kingdoms. When it concludes, the portal to your home in Sapin will open again." For a moment, Arthur couldn't speak. Shock, joy, and longing all surged through him at once. He finally understood why Virion had attended that important meeting. He'd done it for him. With deep gratitude, Arthur bowed his head. Virion smiled warmly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Rejoice, Arthur," he said softly. "Soon, you will see them again." That same day, when Arthur asked about Tessia, Virion told him she already knew, and that her parents had informed her that very night. That night, Arthur sat speaking to his dragon egg, telling it what would soon happen. Suddenly, the egg began to glow. Arthur tensed, unsure of what was happening, until the shell opened and a tiny dragon emerged. Arthur loved her at first sight, until she bit him, and he realized she wasn't as gentle as she looked. She had placed a magical seal on him. From that moment, Arthur could hear her voice, even if her words were unclear, and he was overjoyed to be able to communicate with her. He named her Sylvie, after Sylvia. He kept staring at the seal drawn on his arm, hardly believing he had become a father at only 8 years old. In the morning, as usual, Tessia came to wake him. When she lifted the blanket and saw the strange little creature, she let out a scream so loud that Arthur jolted awake. Yet it wasn't fear, it was excitement. Tessia was thrilled with Sylvie, cuddling and doting on her like a small child. When they went to the training grounds, Tessia tried in every way to make Sylvie like her, but the little dragon gave no attention to anyone but Arthur. When they reached Virion, Arthur worried how people would react to a creature like Sylvie, but Virion reassured him. No one would believe she was a dragon. They would simply assume she was a special mana beast, and that would be the end of it. Training changed from there. Varian told Arthur he must now learn to control the mana of beasts, and that the best training was physical combat. But not just any combat. All at once, Varian turned into a terrifying beast with a deep, rumbling voice. His aura was heavy. The light around him seemed to be swallowed by the dark. Arthur was so shaken he couldn't see him clearly. Varian disappeared and reappeared in different places, until Arthur finally surrendered. When Varian returned to his normal form, he said the beast was called a shadow bancer, a creature that manipulates light and sound so completely you barely sense it nearby. Despite its great power, it consumes a tremendous amount of its wielder's energy. Then Varian took up a staff and smiled. Now, let's train like humans. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Arthur grew significantly, learning to command his mana and the strength of his beast until he became strong enough to face Varian's shadow bancer himself. As the portal's opening drew near, Tessia felt her heart breaking at the thought of parting. Seeing her sadness, Arthur decided to make peace. He slipped in through her window with a flower. When she stood before him, he tucked the flower behind her ear and asked if she wanted to go out for a while. They left together, ignoring the many warnings about entering the forest. They walked beneath the trees until Arthur lit a fire for warmth, and they sat beside it talking. Sleepiness began to weigh on Tessia, but she didn't want to leave him. They kept talking about the human world. Midway through, drowsiness won, and she slept, feeling safe at his side. The next day, it was time to travel. Varian gave Arthur a magic compass so he wouldn't lose his way, explaining it bore a special seal. If Arthur ever wished to return, it would guide him back. Arthur asked about Tessia, remembering she was too sad to say goodbye. But as he stood before the portal that would open his path, he heard a voice calling his name. Tessia was running toward him. She stumbled and fell, then rose and kept running. She embraced him, urging him to eat well and take care of himself. Arthur placed his hand on her head and said he would miss her. With tears in her eyes, she answered that she could not do without him either. The portal opened. Farewell was painful and hard, every feeling clear on their faces, yet each tried to hide their tears from the other. After a long journey, Arthur finally returned to human lands. His heart pounded with excitement. He would see his family again. He walked until he reached the house and knocked softly. A little girl opened the door. He looked at her and smiled, realizing she was his younger sister, the one he had left while she was still in their mother's womb. Behind her stood his father and mother, calling the girl Eleanor. When they saw him, they were stunned, unable to believe their eyes. Their lost son stood before them alive. They all went inside. Alice immediately began asking if he was well. The last time they had contacted him, he had been ill, and she had been terribly worried. Arthur reassured her that he was fine, and that there was no need to worry, but he had much to tell. He began explaining what had happened since he was separated from them, though he did not mention Sylvia, nor the matter of the beast's will. He told them he had met Tessia and stayed in the Elven Kingdom for a time to recover. Alice asked again if he was fully healed, fearing he might fall ill once more, and Arthur assured her it would not happen. Because he could not tell the truth, he gave a reason. His ailment was caused by using mana early, before the proper time, which had thrown his energy out of balance. He disliked lying, but felt forced to hide certain things, until he became strong enough to face whatever danger might come. Suddenly, Reynold noticed Sylvie and asked where Arthur had gotten her. Arthur improvised a story, that he had found her in a cave and decided to keep her as a pet. Eleanor bonded quickly with Sylvie, and the mood eased, but Reynold still had questions, asking about Arthur's current mana level. Alice scolded him. Enough arguing, he's come home from a long journey. Yet Reynold insisted on knowing his son's strength. Arthur saw no harm in answering, but first asked what his father did now. Reynold said he worked as a security instructor, and that his current mana stage was deep orange. Arthur was impressed. Reaching that stage was difficult. The colors began at black and rose toward white. The more the color opened, the stronger the mana. Reynold was the type to enhance his body with mana, and trained constantly. Strangely, he also worked to raise his magical capacity. Then, speaking with pride, he asked his son about his level. Arthur said he had reached light red. Reynold froze in shock, an expletive slipping out before he could stop it. Eleanor heard and began to repeat it. He was stunned that Arthur was only a step away from surpassing him. He asked Arthur to come down to the yard to train together, and Arthur agreed at once. Before they could move, the door opened and Vincent entered, asking if Reynold's son had truly returned. Reynold introduced Arthur to Vincent, explaining he owned the auction house where Reynold worked, his employer. Vincent and his wife Tabitha were delighted to meet Arthur, having heard much about him, and Arthur said it was an honor to make their acquaintance. Then Vincent and Tabitha introduced their daughter Lilia to Arthur. At first, she was shy and barely spoke, but the moment her eyes landed on Sylvie perched on Arthur's shoulder, she fell in love instantly. She asked softly if she could touch her. When Arthur nodded, Lilia reached out and began to pet the little dragon gently, her face lighting up with pure joy. Reynold chuckled and said, "You'd better be careful, Arthur. Remember, this house belongs to Vincent now, so you should ask before you go breaking anything." At the word breaking, Vincent's face stiffened in alarm. His suspicion was soon confirmed when he realized that Reynold and Arthur were planning to have a sparring match in the garden. Everyone went outside to watch. Wait, Vincent said, incredulous. You mean Arthur is going to fight his own father? He could hardly believe that a boy so young had reached such strength, but Alice smiled proudly and said, my son learns quickly. If he says he can fight, he's not exaggerating. Tabitha looked at her husband with a calm smile and said, just sit down and enjoy it. You're about to see something special. In truth, Arthur had already reached the orange stage some time ago. Though during his training with the Beast's Will, he hadn't been allowed to use ordinary mana. Still, he'd kept a few surprises hidden, waiting for the perfect time to show them. The duel began. Arthur and Reynold exchanged blows, testing each other's strength. Admiration filled Reynold's face. You've come a long way, son, he said between strikes. Even so, Reynold's physical strength gave him the upper hand. He pressed forward with a series of powerful attacks, forcing Arthur back. Then he decided to take things up a notch. Flames ignited around his arm as he warned, if you think you can't handle this, now's the time to quit. In this world, every mage possessed a specific mana affinity, like a fingerprint, unique to them. Those who summoned creatures and elements could shape that mana externally, while those who used mana to enhance their bodies, like Reynold, had a harder path. But there was one exception. Once they reached a certain level, they could discover their elemental alignment and use it to reinforce their blows. Reynold now wrapped his body in the mana of fire, his strikes burning with raw intensity. He became a fierce, unstoppable opponent. Arthur, refusing to back down, began channeling mana through his arms. Their clash resumed, this time more balanced. He deflected attacks skillfully, but Reynold's sheer power still sent him flying back each time. Frustration flickered across Arthur's face, but he didn't give up. He knew he had more to show. The knowledge he'd carried from his previous life made his training vastly more efficient. He had mastered fire magic with remarkable speed. That was why Virion had encouraged him to start experimenting with higher levels of fire. Now, Arthur gathered his mana once again, and something changed. Sparks of lightning began to crackle around his body. Yes, Arthur was using lightning. It was the first time his new ability had surfaced. Reynolds stared in disbelief. At first, he thought Arthur was manipulating a hotter form of fire. But no, it was genuine lightning, and that wasn't all. While lightning surged in his hands, Arthur simultaneously drew water from a nearby fountain and launched it behind Reynold. His father barely managed to block the attack, his mind reeling. Arthur could control two elements, fire and water, without even realizing he also wielded lightning. Reynold was stunned, overwhelmed by pride. He approached his son and pulled him into a firm embrace. Where did you learn all this? What else are you hiding from me? Arthur smiled humbly. I've just started practicing lightning magic. I can't control it perfectly yet, but I'm improving. At that moment, Eleanor came running into the yard to check on them, her eyes wide with amazement. Vincent and Tabitha stood frozen in awe. What Arthur had done wasn't something any normal child, or even most adults, could achieve. When the spar ended, everyone returned inside for dinner. Vincent couldn't stop praising Arthur, his voice filled with admiration. I knew it, he said proudly. That boy was never ordinary. He awakened his mana at 3 years old, didn't he? 3 years? Vincent repeated in shock. You're joking. Geniuses don't awaken before 8. Reynold burst out laughing. Oh, he did awaken at 3, and blew up our house in the process. Laughter erupted around the table. Reynold laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. Then Vincent stood and said decisively, that settles it. Arthur must attend Cyrus Academy. A boy like him deserves the best education there is. Reynold had never considered it before. The academy was for nobles, elites, and the exceptionally gifted. But Tabitha agreed with her husband. We can cover the tuition, she said warmly. A talent like Arthur's shouldn't be held back. Alice hesitated. You've already done so much for us, she said softly. And besides, he's only 8. The academy usually starts at 10. Vincent reassured her with a confident grin. Don't worry. I know the headmistress personally. I can convince her to make an exception before he could finish. Arthur spoke up. Can I give my opinion first? He said calmly. I just reunited with my family today. I'd like to stay with them a little while before being sent away again. He rose from the table and walked down the hall, still unfamiliar with the house's size. Suddenly, Lilia called out after him, if you keep walking that way, you'll get lost. Come on, follow me. Arthur, smiling faintly, replied, all right then, lead the way. Lilia led him toward the sitting room where the household staff usually gathered. Inside the servants' hall, Lilia was greeted warmly, as she always was when she found a spare moment to sit among them. Although Arthur had only returned that day, everyone already knew who he was, the boy who had just set the garden ablaze in a sparring match with Reynold. He apologized for the trouble, but the servants took it lightly, laughing about it instead of scolding him. Lilia asked Maria if there was any meat left. Maria nodded but warned her kindly to watch her appetite. She'd been eating a little too much lately. One of the maids leaned toward Arthur and whispered that Lilia often came here whenever she was upset. Her parents kept kept pressuring her to awaken her mana, to become a magician like them. She wanted that too, but the pressure was exhausting. So, this room had become her refuge, a place where she could breathe and forget about expectations for a while. That night, Arthur sat with his family. They still couldn't fully believe he had come back. His face and stature had changed since they last saw him, but to them he was still the same son. To them his talent was extraordinary, and they were certain he would one day become a powerful mage, but even if he didn't, their love for him would never change. The day had been long, so they left him to rest. Before leaving the room, Reynolds stopped to speak. He wanted to make one thing clear. What Vincent had said earlier about the academy wasn't meant to pressure Arthur. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "no one expects you to go anywhere you don't wish to." The next morning, Arthur came downstairs quickly. Some of Reynolds' teammates had come to visit after hearing he'd returned. He was genuinely happy to see them, especially Angela, who hugged him tightly with teary eyes. They sat together, sharing stories. Arthur learned that the team had recently completed a major mission in a city called Staten before returning to the capital for another assignment. Only then did he realize how little he actually knew about the kingdom of Sapin or the continent itself. For a fleeting moment, he thought about traveling the world to learn more, but then he remembered what that would mean. Leaving his family again. He wasn't ready for that. A few mornings later, Arthur sat in his room in quiet reflection. Time seemed to crawl. He considered testing a new technique, but his body wasn't strong enough yet. Within seconds, exhaustion overwhelmed him. He also recalled what the servants had mentioned, Vincent and Tabitha's growing worry over Lilia, who still hadn't awakened her mana. Suddenly, Alice appeared and announced that it was time to prepare Arthur for the day. After much effort, grooming, and styling, Arthur emerged looking refined and elegant. The women couldn't hide their delight. Tabitha thanked him with a smile and said his appearance now suited the grand auction perfectly. Alice explained that the event would be attended by kings and nobles, and Arthur had to look the part before accompanying them. Tabitha decided to take him on a tour of the city first. Eleanor asked to come along, which made Lilia pout. She was used to having Eleanor to herself, but since Arthur had arrived, the little girl hadn't left his side. Still, she said nothing and joined them. They left together for the market. Alice bought Arthur a set of new clothes. Later they played for a while in the city square near the king's statue. Some students from the Magic Academy appeared nearby, mocking the townsfolk and tossing pebbles with arrogance. Arthur ignored them, unwilling to start a fight. Lilia whispered bitterly, "They act like royalty just because they can use mana." But Arthur only smiled faintly and said nothing. Then he sensed a strange energy coming from a nearby shop. He followed it inside, a store selling beast cores, crystallized mana from slain monsters that could enhance a mage's power. He knew about cores. After all, Sylvie had come from one. But he hadn't expected them to be traded so casually. That was unheard of in the Elven Kingdom. Tabitha explained that some rare cores contained the will of a beast, making them extremely valuable. The cheapest ones start at 100 gold pieces, she said. That alone could feed a family for centuries. She added that they planned to auction a few rare ones soon, and promised Arthur he'd be allowed to hold one. A privilege few ever received. He smiled politely, though he already possessed more than enough of that power himself. Suddenly, Lilia's expression darkened. Tabitha immediately understood why. Her daughter longed for a core that could awaken her mana. She sighed and said gently, "That's not how it works, dear." Lilia tried to argue, but her mother ended the topic firmly. "Enough. Don't bring it up again." They went to a restaurant for lunch, but Arthur barely touched his food. He kept glancing at Lilia, reading the sadness and frustration in her eyes. He understood her pain. Her father's hopes were heavy burdens to carry, and she was desperate to awaken her power, no matter how. He wanted to help, especially since her family had done so much for his. But before he could speak, he realized she was gone. They searched the area and finally found her in a weapon shop, trying to buy a cheap beast core with all the money she had. Arthur stopped her gently, explaining that buying a core wouldn't awaken her mana. That wasn't how it worked. She refused to listen. Tears filled her eyes as she shouted that it was unfair, that he was gifted while she was ordinary, powerless. Their voices rose, and in the confusion, Lilia accidentally bumped into a student from the Magic Academy. The girl wasn't alone. 2 of her classmates stood with her, and they decided to teach Lilia a lesson. The shopkeeper didn't dare intervene. Arthur moved forward, mana already stirring within him. But before he could act, Tabitha entered the shop. Her presence alone silenced the room. With a single word, she revealed who she was, the head of House Helia. The students paled instantly. Their arrogance vanished, replaced by trembling respect. The Helia family were major benefactors of the academy, and crossing them could ruin anyone's future. The matter ended at once. When they returned home, and Vincent heard what had happened, he thanked Arthur for not starting a fight that might have drawn the academy's wrath. He reminded both Arthur and Lilia to be careful with their actions, especially with Arthur's enrollment approaching. But then came the blow neither expected. When Lilia learned that her father planned to pay Arthur's tuition, her face burned with rage. She realized he saw Arthur as the better child, the one worth investing in, while she, his own daughter, was being replaced. Her anger erupted. Through tears, she shouted that she hated both of them, her father and Arthur alike. Arthur said nothing. He knew she didn't mean it. That night, he went to her door and gently knocked, inviting her to dinner, but she didn't answer. The room stayed silent. At that moment, Sylvie alerted Arthur to a worker standing quietly behind them. The man approached cautiously and informed him that Lilia wasn't in her room, then offered to take him to her. He led Arthur through the corridors until they reached a quiet corner of the estate garden, where Lilia sat alone, lost in thought, haunted by the weight of her failures and by how deeply she believed she'd disappointed her parents. She remembered being little, how her father used to smile and tell her he dreamed of seeing her become a mage one day. He never stopped encouraging her, even when she didn't improve quickly. Her mother would comfort her, saying softly not to rush, reminding her that her father had even donated large sums of money to secure her a place in the academy once her mana awakened. But now those memories only hurt. When she overheard her father saying the exact same words to Arthur, the boy who had entered their lives only a few days ago, it felt as if something inside her shattered. In that instant, her worth seemed to vanish. Her pain deepened further when the academy girls mocked her, saying that even if she bought a mana core, it would be useless, because she had no talent at all. She felt like a girl who had everything in the world, yet couldn't make use of any of it. Then Arthur's voice broke her silence. He told her gently that her parents were worried and that they truly loved her. He wanted to apologize, feeling partly responsible for how things had turned out, but stopped himself. He knew an apology wouldn't change anything, especially since he hadn't truly done wrong. To his surprise, Lilia was the first to apologize. Her voice trembled with sincerity as she said she hadn't meant to hurt him. She admitted how she was constantly frustrated by her slow progress, how seeing him so gifted from the very first day made her feel even smaller, especially when she noticed her father's growing attention toward him. Arthur smiled softly and told her that wasn't true at all. His calm reassurance made her eyes light up. He understood her pain deeply. He knew too well what it felt like to be forgotten, to feel as though you meant nothing. He began to tell her about the place where he'd learned magic, about a kind young girl he'd met there. He showed her the flower Tessia had given him, and when he saw her face brighten in admiration, he smiled and said her father wasn't replacing her. He was just excited for her, believing in her potential. Still, Arthur knew that words alone weren't enough. If he truly wanted to help her, he needed to act. So he asked quietly, "Do you really want to learn magic?" Her answer came instantly, filled with passion. "Of course I do." Then he understood. The real pain wasn't her parents' actions, but that she felt unseen by them, treated like a helper in her own home, rather than as their daughter. Meanwhile, Vincent and Tabitha had discovered their daughter missing. Panic filled the house as they rushed to Arthur, demanding to know what had happened. He told them calmly that he had sent her to the same place where he had once learned magic. Vincent's anger exploded. "Even if your intentions were good," he shouted, "you should have asked us first." But Arthur stood firm. "That was her wish," he replied. "If I had told you, you would have stopped her." Then he handed them a letter written in Lilia's own handwriting. In it, she apologized, saying she knew she was useless and had decided to travel away to learn magic, vowing not to return until she awakened her mana. Vincent fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He realized how wrong he'd been. He was the one who made her believe her worth depended on magic, that without it, she was nothing. Through his sobs, he whispered, "Even if you never awaken your power, you're my precious daughter. You never needed to prove anything to me." Then Arthur called softly, "Lilia, do you hear that?" Suddenly, from behind the curtain, Lilia stepped out. The truth struck them. She had never left at all. It was all a plan Arthur had devised to make her parents realize how precious she truly was. Lilia apologized, her voice shaking, and Arthur took the blame upon himself. He told them it had been his idea, that he would never again play with something so serious, because he understood too well what loss felt like. He had once been the lost one himself. Vincent finally saw how far he'd drifted in his obsession with magic. He asked himself bitterly, if magic were that simple, why am I not a mage myself? Then he turned to Arthur and apologized for pushing him toward the academy before he'd even had time to enjoy being home with his family. After that heartfelt moment, he pulled Lilia and Tabitha into an embrace. "You are our precious daughter," he said, his voice trembling. "With or without magic, you are enough. You don't need the academy to prove that." But Lilia smiled through her tears and answered with newfound determination, "I still want to become a mage, and I'll go to the academy, even if it takes me years." So Arthur decided to help her awaken her mana. He asked Lilia and Eleanor to sit down, relax, and breathe slowly. "Close your eyes," he said softly. "Follow your breathing, one breath at a time." Eleanor began to see faint stars glittering before her eyes, but they vanished when she lost focus. Lilia, however, saw nothing at first and frowned in confusion. Then Arthur placed his hands gently on their backs, channeling mana through his palms. Suddenly, Lilia gasped with joy. "I can see them! The stars, they look like the flower you showed me, Arthur." Her parents were overjoyed. They decided to hold a celebration that very night in honor of her awakening. During the party, Arthur told Lilia that it would take about 2 years to fully synchronize with her mana, but with steady training she would do just fine. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom, a mysterious man arrived at the city gates, surrounded by an imposing entourage. From his bearing alone, it was clear he was a king. He had come after hearing rumors of the grand auction soon to be held in the capital, and wished to witness it himself. Not long after, Arthur's family received an invitation to attend the same auction. When they entered the hall, they were stunned by its grandeur and scale. A wave of nervousness crossed Alice's face. She felt out of place in such an elegant setting. But Tabitha smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry," she said. "Tonight, we're here simply to enjoy ourselves." That evening was the most anticipated event in the entire kingdom. Adventurers, nobles, and aristocrats from distant lands gathered together for this rare occasion. Displayed before them were treasures collected personally by Vincent, enchanted beast cores, rare sculptures from faraway realms, and countless other wonders. For that reason, security was at its highest level, and Reynold himself was in charge of it all. The auction began, and Vincent stepped onto the grand stage. He greeted the crowd warmly, his voice full of pride, announcing that tonight was a special occasion, for the royal family of the Kingdom of Sapin was among their honored guests. Present were King Blaine, Queen Priscilla, and their 2 young children, Curtis and Catherine. Applause thundered through the hall as everyone stood and bowed deeply in respect to the royal family. Arthur watched the spectacle with quiet curiosity, thinking that these royals must be good people if their subjects admired them so sincerely. Meanwhile, Reynold, ever vigilant, went into full alert with the royal guards to ensure that everything proceeded without incident. The first item of the night was unveiled, a sword forged by a master blacksmith, its edge imbued with crackling electric mana. The opening bid, 50,000 gold pieces. The crowd erupted in excitement as the bidding climbed higher and higher. Arthur sat observing, fascinated by the energy in the room, imagining how he might enhance such a blade with his own magic one day. Then he noticed Vincent presenting 2 rare masks on the stage. It caught his attention for a moment, until a sudden unease struck him. Sylvie was no longer by his side. He remembered she had been playing with Lilia and Eleanor, but when he glanced their way, both girls were sound asleep. Panic rising, he stood and began searching for her. At that very time, Sylvie was wandering the auction halls, driven by innocent curiosity. She didn't sense the danger until a man stopped her. The royal mage, accompanying the family. On stage, Vincent unveiled the next exhibit, a lion cub ranked A-class, a rare and powerful beast that drew gasps of admiration from the crowd. Curtis, the young prince, looked at it with wide, sparkling eyes and told his father he wanted one just like it. King Blaine chuckled softly, and as the bidding began, another noble king raised the price to 1,000 gold. No one dared to outbid him, and he claimed the prize with ease. When the king ascended the stage to collect it, Vincent asked politely what he intended to do with such a creature. The king smiled and said he might tame it himself, but would give it to his son if he chose the path of a beast tamer. The audience murmured in admiration, though Arthur remained elsewhere, still searching desperately for Sylvie. Then, a scream echoed from a distant corridor. Arthur sprinted toward the sound and found the royal mage standing before Sylvie. He recognized him instantly, the same man who had entered with the royal family. Arthur approached calmly but firmly, telling him to step away, explaining that the creature was his contracted beast. The mage blinked in surprise. He had assumed Sylvie was one of the auction's exhibits. Sylvie leapt into Arthur's arms, but before he could leave, the mage blocked his path again. With a sneer, he demanded that Arthur hand her over, claiming it was an order from a royal mage. Arthur's expression turned cold, his eyes sharp and unreadable. How could this man expect him to simply give her up? Annoyed by Arthur's defiance, the mage raised his hand and hurled a fireball toward him, trying to intimidate him. But Arthur didn't flinch. He stood motionless, and then, with a slow turn of his head, a suffocating aura burst from within him. The very air warped, light shattered. Every pane of glass in the auction hall exploded in a single instant. The mana pouring from Arthur was like a black storm devouring the world. Those with strong mana, including the royals, struggled to withstand it, while others collapsed to the floor, Vincent among them. King Blaine rushed to check on him, and the royal guards flooded the hall, forming a tight perimeter. They believed the outburst was an assassination attempt, but the king raised his hand, voice calm yet commanding. "Stand down. I can protect myself. Focus on the civilians. Find the one responsible." It was then that Arthur realized what he had done. The fear in the room wasn't of him, it was of his power. He had succeeded in scaring the mage, but now he'd trapped himself in disaster. He slowly drew back his mana, forcing the deadly aura to fade, but the damage was already done. Chaos rippled through the hall. Reynolds barked orders, evacuating the guests to safety. Once the crowd cleared, King Blaine sat with him privately, his tone stern and deliberate. "You were responsible for security tonight," he said. Reynolds bowed deeply, voice heavy with guilt, ready to accept whatever punishment the king deemed fit. Before the king could respond, Sebastian, the royal mage, spoke up, wearing a twisted, oily smile. He suggested forgiving Reynolds since no one had been injured. His words sounded generous, but Arthur could sense his greed. Sebastian's eyes gleamed as they flicked toward Sylvie, praising the creature's remarkable mana before expressing his desire to own her. The king turned to the guests and formally introduced Sebastian, explaining that he was one of the strongest mages in the royal family, a man who had saved the king's life more than once. Then, with a courteous smile, he said, "If Sebastian admires this beast, let it be my gift of gratitude to him." Arthur froze. He wanted to protest, but Alice clutched his hand tightly, whispering for him to stay silent before the king. Then Reynolds stepped forward, his voice firm. "With all due respect, your majesty, that beast belongs to my son. No one has the right to take it from him, not even as a gift." The king turned to Arthur, his gaze direct. "Tell me yourself, boy, can you gift this beast to Sebastian?" Arthur looked up calmly and replied with unwavering respect, "I cannot, your majesty. Sylvie is not a thing to be traded or sold." The king's tone hardened. "Then perhaps I can make an exchange," he said, gesturing to the lion cub he had just purchased. "Trade her for this. It's a royal beast, far more powerful." Arthur met his gaze, voice steady. "She's not for sale, not for trade, not for anything." The king's patience began to fray. His voice grew sharper. "I've asked you twice." The king does not repeat himself a third time. Arthur smiled faintly, a calm, dangerous smile. "Would you sell your own children, your majesty?" The words struck the hall like lightning. The king froze, speechless. Arthur continued, tone quiet but unyielding. "I've refused 3 times and you still don't understand. Some things cannot be bought, because their worth is beyond gold." The guards lunged forward to seize him, but Arthur moved first. With a single motion, he sent them sprawling across the floor, unconscious. Sebastian roared in fury and unleashed a massive fire spell toward him. And then, time stopped. The air froze. The flame halted mid-air, suspended inches from Arthur's face. Everything stood still, except for him. Arthur walked slowly through the frozen blaze until he stood before Sebastian, whose eyes flickered helplessly in disbelief. "No one hears you now," Arthur whispered, voice calm and cold, "and no one can save you." The mage tried to speak, but sound no longer existed. Arthur grabbed his legs and with terrifying ease, shattered them. A silent scream tore through Sebastian's face as agony twisted his features. Leaning close, Arthur murmured, "If you threaten me again, you'll experience something far worse. Remember your place." Then the light around them warped, and time began to move again. The flame vanished, the world resumed, and Arthur collapsed to the floor, utterly drained. The hall fell into stunned silence. No one understood what had just happened, only that the boy who had terrified everyone moments ago now lay unconscious at the center of the chaos. When Arthur awoke, Alice gently told him what had happened after he collapsed. She said everyone had been terrified when he suddenly lost consciousness, and she had rushed to treat him as best she could. Even with her care, his body had needed time. His mana channels and strength were still recovering from the shock. When she saw that he had finally opened his eyes and looked stable, she smiled warmly and said, "How about we go out for a bit?" "We need to buy a few things." Arthur agreed right away. After everything that had happened, he truly needed to clear his mind. As they walked through the bustling market, Arthur's gaze stopped on a beautiful hairpin displayed at a stall. He thought to himself, this would look lovely on Eleanor. But when he checked his coin pouch, he realized he didn't have enough. Alice noticed his expression immediately. Without hesitation, she bought it for him and handed it over with a smile. "Give it to Eleanor as a present," she said. "She'll be so happy." Then she looked at another shop and said cheerfully, "Would you like me to buy you something as well?" Arthur hesitated. "Are you sure we should be spending this much? Maybe father lost his job after what happened at the auction. What if we don't have enough money?" Alice chuckled softly, her eyes full of calm confidence. "Don't worry, dear. We're fine. And besides," she added proudly, "I have a job too." Arthur blinked. "You do? What kind of job?" Her smile deepened. "I make fine goods for the nobles. They love my crafts, and they sell for good prices." After a while, they returned home, their arms full of shopping bags. But as they stepped through the door, they heard Reynolds' voice echoing angrily from the living room. "No one will silence me, especially after my son nearly lost his life." Arthur hurried inside. "Father, what's going on?" The moment Reynolds saw him, his anger faded, replaced by relief. "Thank the gods you're all right, son." Arthur nodded gently. "I'm fine, truly." A well-dressed stranger sitting nearby turned toward him with a polite smile. "Ah, so you're the young man involved in the incident. A pleasure to finally meet you." "Please have a seat." Arthur and his mother exchanged glances and sat down. The man placed a heavy pouch of gold on the table and said, "This is a small compensation from His Majesty for the minor accident that occurred." Arthur forced a courteous smile, replying, "Please thank the king for his kindness." But inwardly, he thought bitterly, "Minor accident? 2 knights and a royal mage attacked me." The man laughed lightly. "The king is very concerned for your safety. The knights who attacked you have been dismissed from service. The king would never tolerate anyone harming a child merely for refusing a request." Reynolds clenched his fists in outrage. "Dismissed? That's it? They tried to kill my son." The messenger raised a hand, keeping his tone calm. "Sir Reynolds, remember, your son spoke quite rashly to the king. Yet His Majesty still allowed your family to continue your work at the auction. The situation must remain balanced." Reynolds was about to protest, but Arthur intervened quickly. "I was the one who spoke out of turn," he said evenly. "It was my mistake, and I'm fine now. Let's just end this." Then he asked, "What about Sebastian?" The man's expression shifted slightly. "He's been dismissed as well. He's in the royal hospital now. He insists that you broke his legs, but everyone swears you never moved from your spot. No one saw you touch him." The king concluded that his own spell backfired on him. Now he's full of regret, and is even seeking ways to compensate you. Then, with a hint of genuine advice, the man added, "You're a talented young man, Arthur. But be careful when dealing with people of power. Not all of them are as kind as the king." He rose, bowed politely, and took his leave. Reynolds picked up the pouch of gold and handed it to Arthur. "This belongs to you, son." Arthur blinked in surprise. "Are you sure? All of it?" Reynolds nodded firmly. "Of course. You were the one in danger, so this is rightfully yours. And besides, you'll need money if you plan to do something great in the future." Arthur looked at him quietly, his mind drifting. That day had taught him a powerful lesson. Once, he had been a king, but now, he was just a child, weak, unknown, and without influence. If he wanted to survive in this world, he would need more than strength. He would need power, political, social, and magical. The next day, he received a summons. He was to meet Good Sky, the headmistress of the Academy of Magic. She wasn't someone easily approached. Her authority extended far and wide, and her words carried the weight of law. As the head of Cyrus Academy, she was a legend among mages, wise, sharp, and utterly uncompromising. She had heard many good things about Arthur from Vincent, but she was not the kind of woman to believe rumors or praise. She wanted proof, real proof, that the boy deserved his growing reputation, so she decided to test him herself. The first thing Good Sky did upon meeting Arthur was test his resolve. She unleashed a tremendous surge of mana, the kind that could crush even seasoned mages, letting her overwhelming power fill the entire hall. Yet Arthur stood his ground. His feet didn't move, his expression didn't waver. It was as if the storm raging around him didn't exist. Still, he admitted honestly, "That's frightening power." And of course it was. She was the most powerful mage in the entire kingdom. Deciding that he needed to prove his worth and show that Vincent's praises weren't exaggerated, Arthur began his demonstration. He first enveloped himself in wind mana, the air swirling tightly around his form. At the same time, he called upon earth magic, lifting several stones from the ground. With a flick of his wrist, he used the wind to accelerate them, launching the rocks toward her at blinding speed. But Good Sky deflected them effortlessly. One wave of her hand was enough. The stones shattered into dust before they even touched her. Arthur didn't stop. He conjured flaming daggers behind her back and sent them flying. Yet she countered once more with wind magic, dispersing the blades with a single gust. He clenched his fists, frustrated at how easily she dismantled his every attempt. So he charged straight toward her, deciding to strike hand to hand. Before he could reach her, however, a barrier of roaring wind erupted between them, and with a flick of her palm, she sent him tumbling backward to the floor. Lying there, he realized he stood no chance against her, not as he was now, but instead of anger or disdain, Good Sky simply smiled and said, "You're remarkably gifted, but your problem is that you overestimate yourself. That's why you thought you could defeat me so easily." Then, with a faint smirk, she lifted both hands. "Your final test," she said, "is simple. Stay standing after my next strike." The air around her vibrated. She released a massive wave of sound magic that shattered the rocks surrounding him. The pressure pierced his ears like knives. His whole body trembled. It felt as though the world itself was collapsing, but Arthur refused to fall. He gritted his teeth and endured until the deafening storm subsided, still standing. Good Sky lowered her arms, her eyes gleaming with astonishment. His endurance impressed her. She began to consider taking him as her apprentice. But before she could speak, Arthur did. "I didn't come here just to learn magic," he said clearly. "I want to use your power and influence to ensure my family and friends are protected. If you promise to keep them safe, I'll join your academy and accept you as my teacher." Her brows rose. No student had ever spoken to her like that. He continued steadily. "And I have one more condition. I'll only enter the academy when I reach the official enrollment age, so I'll study among students my own age. Good Sky blinked in surprise. That would delay you 3 whole years, she said. Why wait so long? He smiled confidently. Because I want to live my life first, to travel, to become an adventurer, to see the entire continent. She realized his mind was set. There was no changing it. So she asked, have you told your family about this decision? Not yet, he answered. I'll speak to them first. She nodded. If you can convince them, then I'll agree to all your terms. When Arthur returned home and told them his plan to become an adventurer, Alice's reaction was immediate and fierce. She refused outright, her voice trembling with anger. He had only just come back after being gone for so long. She couldn't bear to lose him again. Reynold tried to calm her. Let's at least hear what he has to say, he pleaded, but she shook her head. No, he's still a child. Then Reynold offered a compromise. What if someone accompanied him? Someone strong enough to protect him? Would you agree then? But Alice still refused, her fear stronger than logic. Arthur stepped forward, speaking gently. I won't disappear like before, Mother. I'll come back. I promise. I won't vanish again. He explained that his adventures wouldn't be permanent. He'd return home every few months to visit them. That softened Alice a little, especially when she learned he wouldn't leave immediately, but in a month or two. Even so, her worry lingered in her eyes. She made him promise not to hide anything from her. He agreed, though deep inside, he knew there were truths he could never share for their own safety. Later, Reynold decided that Arthur shouldn't travel alone. The path of adventurers was fraught with danger, so he went to his old comrades and asked if any of them could accompany his son. He admitted he couldn't offer payment but swore he'd find a way to repay them later. His friends refused any reward. We're your comrades, they said. We'll help you no matter what. Adam immediately declined, saying he despised bodyguard work. But then Jasmine raised her hand. I'll do it, she said simply. Everyone stared at her in disbelief. They all knew she hated guard missions even more than Adam, but she added firmly, if it's for Arthur, then I accept. Reynold was deeply grateful. Jasmine was strong, a light orange stage mage, and she already shared a good bond with Arthur. She was, without question, the best person for the task. Once everything was settled, Arthur told his father he wanted to visit the auction and choose a sword for himself. Reynold agreed and arranged a meeting with Vincent the next day. When the day came, Arthur met Vincent, explaining that he needed a weapon for the Adventurers Guild entrance exam. Vincent smiled. Take your time, boy. Look around as much as you like. The armory was vast. Row after row of gleaming blades. Arthur spent the entire day examining sword after sword, yet none of them felt right. As the hours dragged on, Alice began to grow anxious, thinking of going out to look for him, but Reynolds stopped her gently. Choosing a weapon takes time, he said. Let him find his own. Meanwhile, Arthur felt growing frustration. He had seen hundreds of swords, but not one resonated with him. Most were too large for his small frame, and even when he tried other weapons, axes, spears, daggers, none of them felt like his. Nothing stirred his spirit. Not yet. Suddenly, Sylvie caught Arthur's attention. She was pointing at a small piece of wood lying on the floor. Curious, he picked it up and immediately felt something strange. It was far heavier than it looked, as though it weren't an ordinary stick at all, as if a sword slept within it. He focused his mana into his palm and faint runes began to glow along the wood's surface. Then, before his eyes, the wood shifted and unraveled, revealing a blade hidden inside. It was the first time he had ever seen a sword like it. He swung it a few times experimentally. At first the weight threw him off balance, but soon he realized the craftsmanship was exceptional. With a single clean motion, he sliced a barrel in half as though it were paper. Then, without warning, a surge of electricity burst from the blade, shocking him and forcing him to drop it. When he picked it up again, the sensation was completely different. The sword felt balanced, alive, and perfectly matched to his hand. Arthur stared at it in awe. He had owned many fine swords in his past life, but never one that felt so right, as if it had been crafted solely for him. He tried again, striking another barrel with half the force, and split it effortlessly. At that exact moment, Vincent, Reynold, and James entered, looking worried after his long absence. They asked whether he had finally chosen his weapon. Arthur, not wanting them to see the real sword, quickly grabbed another blade from a nearby rack and said that was the one he'd chosen. Reynold examined it briefly and immediately recognized it as ordinary. Still, since Arthur seemed certain, Vincent simply nodded. Let him have it, he said. No harm in that. But Vincent's sharp eyes caught the wooden staff hanging at Arthur's side. What about that? He asked. Arthur replied quickly. Oh, that. It's just a practice stick I found. Thought I'd train with it a little. Vincent frowned. He didn't recall ever owning anything like it in his collection. He turned to James. Check the records. Where did that come from? James searched through the archives and said, apparently some old man dropped it off one day. He said, no suitable wielder for this thing. He claimed it was useless. We had a few experts inspect it, but they all said it was just an ordinary staff. We only kept it because of its unusual design. Arthur immediately begged them to let him keep it. Vincent agreed. After all, if everyone thought it was worthless, what harm could it do? Days passed peacefully. Arthur enjoyed his time with his family and friends while preparing for his journey. And before long, his 9th birthday arrived. They threw a lively celebration for him, surrounded by laughter and warmth. When it was time for gifts, Alice went first. She handed him a finely crafted glove embedded with small healing stones, a self-healing aid in case of injury. Then Vincent presented 2 rings, one for Arthur and one for Alice. He explained that Alice's ring would glow if Arthur ever faced mortal danger, allowing her to know instantly. The final gift came from Adam, a magical sound recording scroll. With it, Arthur could send voice messages to his family and receive their replies. Arthur thanked them all sincerely, his voice filled with emotion. He told them he'd be leaving the next day and wanted them to know how deeply he appreciated everything they'd done for him. Alice, tears glistening in her eyes, said softly, please take care of yourself. I don't care if you become powerful or wealthy. Just come home safely. That night, Arthur packed his belongings. He felt a quiet ache in his chest at the thought of leaving, but his resolve was clear. He would grow stronger, strong enough to protect everyone he loved. To do that, he had to face the world on his own. When he came downstairs, his family was waiting. Reynolds placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're strong, son, but don't let pride blind you. Act wisely. We're proud of you, and we'll be waiting for your stories." After heartfelt goodbyes, Arthur stepped outside. Jasmine was already there, smiling. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded. "Let's go." Their first stop was the Adventurers Guild, where he would register officially as an adventurer. Together they entered the Grand Hall, and Arthur began the registration process for his rank evaluation. He wasn't sure how things worked, but the staff guided him patiently. Judging by Jasmine's calm expression, everything was going smoothly. To protect his family from unwanted attention or danger, Arthur wore a mask, a disguise that would keep his true identity secret, even if he attracted trouble later. He didn't want people judging his abilities based on his family name. Jasmine, on the other hand, was already an A-rank adventurer, a respected figure within the guild. Soon they met Caspian, the guild master himself. He told Arthur he would need to pass 2 tests, a written exam and a mana strength evaluation. But since Jasmine was personally recommending him, and because he knew her father well, he offered to waive the written test. However, he added with a faint smile, "If you don't wish to use your real name, you'll need an alias." Arthur thought for a moment. Then he looked up confidently and said, "Call me Not." After the registration was complete, Caspian asked Arthur and Jasmine to follow him to the guild's testing arena, where the evaluation would take place. As they walked through the wide stone corridor toward the training grounds, Arthur glanced at his companion and asked, "Are you related to the guild master? He seems to be helping you quite a bit." Jasmine smiled faintly. "He's not a relative," she said, "but he knows my father well. He has strong connections. It's my father he respects, not me." When they reached the arena and Caspian opened the large gate, Arthur was met with the sight of a duel already in progress. At the center of the wide evaluation floor, 2 mages were locked in combat. One of them was a young girl named Diane, a water mage, and the other was her instructor, the one overseeing her test. Diane summoned a sharp wave of water that rushed toward her examiner, but the man easily deflected it and vanished into the steam. A moment later, he appeared behind her and tapped her lightly on the head. He praised her for the speed with which she had cast her spell, but pointed out that her spatial awareness was weak. She hadn't sensed his approach at all. Then he gave her the result. Rank C. The girl's face lit up with joy, and she thanked him sincerely. Jasmine leaned toward Arthur and whispered, "That's actually a great result for someone her age. She should be proud." Next came a young boy named Knight. But before his test began, the instructors suddenly stopped him. They huddled together for a brief discussion, and after only a moment, they announced that Knight had passed automatically, without fighting at all, granting him the B rank on the spot. The room filled with murmurs of surprise. Even Arthur and Jasmine exchanged puzzled looks. No one understood why he was given a free promotion, but they chose to remain silent and observe. Then came the turn of another boy, Lucas. He strutted into the arena with exaggerated confidence, his posture and smirk practically screaming arrogance. He acted as if everyone else in the room was beneath him. The examiner, a female instructor, was visibly annoyed by his attitude, yet she couldn't deny his talent. He was barely 11 years old and had already reached the light orange stage in mana refinement, a feat almost unheard of for someone that young. Arthur studied him closely. His features resembled those of the elves. Strange, he thought. I didn't expect to see an elf here, among humans. When the match began, Lucas raised his staff and began chanting, summoning a fiery guardian spirit to attack his instructor. She, however, countered instantly, using earth magic to crush the creature in a single strike. Lucas gritted his teeth, refused to give up, and slammed his staff into the ground. flames burst upward, swirling into a massive inferno that twisted through the air. It was impressive. Until he lost control. The fire turned wild, breaking free from his command, and in seconds it threatened to engulf him entirely. The instructor leapt into action, summoning walls of earth to smother the blaze and pull him to safety. He was unharmed, at least physically, but his pride was in ruins. She tried to comfort him, complimenting his raw strength and potential, but he was too angry to listen. Consumed by humiliation, he suddenly turned on her, attempting to strike when her guard was down. Fortunately, Arthur had been watching closely. With perfect timing, he hurled his sword across the field, intercepting Lucas's spell before it hit. The instructor froze for a moment, then sighed. It was clear there was no point continuing with a reckless boy like this. Although Lucas's strength could have easily qualified him for a B rank, she lowered his evaluation all the way down to D rank for his lack of discipline and self-control. Lucas turned red with rage, shouting threats about telling his father, but the instructor didn't even look at him. She grabbed him by the collar and dragged him out of the arena like a scolded child. Then came Arthur's turn. He stepped into the arena calmly, determination clear in his eyes. This time, he had no intention of hiding his true power. The moment he released his mana, the atmosphere shifted. A terrifying pressure filled the air, forcing even the instructor to brace herself defensively. The nearby guard could only stare, shocked by the sheer force radiating from him. At that very moment, Caspian himself stepped into the arena. "I'll handle this one," he said firmly. The instructor blinked in disbelief. "Isn't that overkill? You're an A-rank adventurer." Caspian smiled faintly. "Don't worry, it'll just be a light spar." He turned to Arthur. "Are you ready?" Though Arthur hadn't expected to face one of the strongest adventurers in the guild on his very first day, his blood stirred with excitement. He nodded. "I'm ready." But, unfortunately, that was where the scene ended. The battle itself was never shown. Afterward, it was revealed that Arthur had passed the test. His rank, B-class adventurer. It marked the completion of his very first step into a larger world. From that day forward, Arthur Lewin began his life, not as a child, but as a true adventurer. At that time, the instructors gathered in Caspian's office to discuss something that had been troubling them. The unusual increase in B-rank adventurers that year, most of whom were still children. Caspian listened quietly before explaining. About 6 months ago, there was a cultural exchange between different races. Although the event wasn't made public, several children from other species received official licenses permitting them to work as adventurers. Lucas was one of them. Even though he violated some guild regulations, his family's influence makes it very possible for him to hold a B-rank title in the future. But there was something odd. Lucas's entire family was human. That meant his lineage was mixed, and rumors suggested he might have been born from an elf woman who once served as a maid in the family household. As for Knight, the instructors had no record of him at all. He had been promoted to B rank without ever taking an exam, because a powerful sponsor stood behind him. Someone whose strength and authority made it impossible for Caspian to intervene. When asked about this mysterious patron, Caspian explained he's human by birth, but was raised in the Dwarf Kingdom. He was sent here as their representative to adapt to human society. Our guild is not permitted to interfere with him. The last candidate discussed was the most mysterious of all. Arthur. The instructors couldn't understand why Caspian had chosen to test the boy personally. He told them frankly, "I don't have a single record on him. I don't even know his real identity, but I'm certain he represents no kingdom. Still, I sense powerful people behind him, especially considering that he arrived with Jasmine, the daughter of the legendary Vermzoris family, and his swordsmanship." Caspian's eyes glinted with respect. "It resembles that of ancient masters. Refined, precise, dangerous." He was genuinely impressed. To him, Arthur Lewin had the makings of someone extraordinary, a boy with limitless potential. But for now, Caspian knew the gap between them remained wide. After leaving the guild, Arthur walked silently through the streets, lost in thought. He had grown deeply attached to the world of magic, perhaps too much. He had been focusing so intensely on mana training that he'd begun neglecting his sword practice. Now, for the first time, he noticed that his blade skills had dulled slightly. While still lost in reflection, he accidentally bumped into Knight and quickly apologized. Knight waved it off and said calmly, "What you did during the exam was reckless. Interfering in someone else's match could have put you in real danger. But honestly," he gave a faint smile, "if I were in your place, I'd have done the same." He was, of course, referring to Arthur's intervention during Lucas's duel. As they spoke, Lucas appeared suddenly and intruded into their conversation without invitation. Arthur's expression turned cold. "Leave," he said flatly. "I don't deal with rule breakers." Lucas's face darkened with rage. He grabbed Arthur by the collar, his voice low and threatening. But all eyes in the guild were now fixed on them. 3 B-rank adventurers about to fight inside guild grounds. If Lucas struck first, he'd be punished severely. Realizing this, he released Arthur with a shove and backed away, muttering in anger before storming off. Jasmine approached then, her usual calm smile returning. "Well," she said lightly, "we've finished what we came here for. Time to move on." But behind that smile, she was hiding a new idea, one that Arthur didn't yet know. She took his hand and led him toward a shimmering magic portal. The instant they stepped through, Arthur found himself standing in a vast expanse of open green land, the Monster Plains. The scenery was breathtaking, endless fields under a clear sky, yet Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was unnatural. "This area," Jasmine explained, "is reserved for beginner adventurers who train, hunt, and collect materials for their quests." Then her tone shifted. "But that's not why we're here today." She looked over her shoulder, eyes confident and sharp. "Follow me," she said. "We'll run all day until we reach the place I'm aiming for." Before Arthur could reply, she took off. Her speed was astonishing, graceful, yet blindingly fast, and Arthur, realizing she wasn't holding back, sprinted after her with renewed excitement. At that moment, Arthur finally began to understand what it truly meant to be an A-rank adventurer. The feeling he'd experienced while facing Caspian returned to him. That overwhelming difference in power. He had believed deep down that he might somehow win, even knowing Caspian was stronger, but after losing so effortlessly, he realized he'd been arrogant, too sure of himself. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from deep within the forest. Moments later, a massive wild boar burst out from between the trees, its eyes wild with rage. It charged blindly, trampling everything in its path. And in one horrifying instant, it swallowed a nearby adventurer whole. Jasmine grabbed Arthur's arm. "Run!" she shouted. "We have to get out of here now. That beast shouldn't even exist in this region. Something's very wrong." They sprinted across the open field. Ahead of them, they spotted a shattered wagon lying in pieces. It didn't take long to realize what had happened. Some adventurers must have been transporting the creature alive, and it had escaped. Who would try to capture something so dangerous? Arthur wondered, but the monster had already seen them. With a furious roar, it charged. They ran with all their strength, dodging through the tall grass, leaping aside as its tusks slashed through the air. When it lashed out with a grotesquely long tongue, both narrowly avoided being impaled. The situation grew dire. "Keep running!" Jasmine cried. "I'll handle it myself." She spun toward the creature, wind mana swirling around her like a storm. Blades of air sliced through the air, striking the boar again and again. For a moment, it staggered, but as soon as she paused, it lunged, crashing toward her with crushing force. At the last second, she rolled aside, barely avoiding death, but her footing gave way, and she began to fall. Arthur caught her before she hit the ground. "Thanks," she gasped, catching her breath. Then her eyes widened. Several rookie adventurers were standing frozen in the monster's path. Without hesitation, she dashed forward, using her magic to push them to safety. The boar roared and began gathering mana for another charge. Arthur clenched his fists, wanting to help, but he forced himself to stop. He remembered the lessons of his previous life. Never act rashly. He'd already overestimated himself today. This time, he would wait for the right moment. When the beast turned all its fury toward Jasmine, Arthur moved. His sword ignited in blazing fire as he dashed forward. With one clean, decisive strike, he brought it down, and the monster fell, motionless. The danger was over. Everyone was safe. But Jasmine looked down, quietly frustrated. She was supposed to be his protector, yet she hadn't been able to defend him at all. She sat beside him and began to speak. She told him her story, how she had joined the world of adventurers to escape her family, a family renowned for generations as masters of fire magic. At first, she had been proud to bear their name. When she showed signs of mana at an early age, they placed immense hopes upon her. But when they discovered that her element wasn't fire, that it was wind, their admiration turned to scorn. They called her a disgrace to their bloodline. Arthur's expression darkened. "Your family is foolish," he said sharply. "There is no strongest element. Every element has its own strength." Jasmine laughed, genuinely amused by his sudden passion. It was rare to see him lose composure, but Arthur wasn't joking. Her words had struck something deep inside him, reminding him of his past life, when everyone had treated him as useless. What her family had done was cruel, yet she hadn't let it break her. Instead, she had found a new path, joining a team that changed her life completely. They taught her to trust, to rely on others, to fight alongside them. Even when they scolded her, she knew it came from care. "They're the reason I'm who I am now," she said softly. "And I hope you'll find something like that too, Arthur. Something that'll change you for the better." Arthur fell silent. He wasn't sure if he could change, not after everything he'd done in his previous life. But when he thought of everyone who had helped him since his rebirth, his family, his friends, his mentors, a quiet resolve formed within him. He would try. He would become someone better. And he would protect everyone who had become precious to him. And thus, our story ends here, my friend. But who knows what awaits Arthur Lewin in his future adventures? That we'll discover in Season 2. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, farewell.